Welcome back, everyone. Let's continue with our next agenda item. Council is going to get a review of the draft strategic plan for 2025 through 2029. Mary, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just waiting for Stephen to pull up the PowerPoint presentation. Cool. Okay, there it is. All right. All right, thank you, everyone. So as the chair mentioned, today I'm going to be presenting a draft strategic plan to cover the next 5 years, 2025 through 2029. So this will actually be the council's third 5-year plan. This one, we kind of treated it like a refresh of the current plan based on council discussion and staff discussion. We felt that many elements of the plan are still continuing to work well. So our goal was to update what's needed, add some new strategies, take out things that have been completed, but generally to keep the existing organization of the plan. So all the materials for this agenda item are in tab 2. So tab 2 has a clean version of the plan, as well as the public comments that I'm going to summarize today. And then if you want to see a red line version of the plan that highlights exactly what has changed from the previous version, that's available as a supplemental document on the meeting page. So the plan for today is I'm going to kind of review the background and purpose of the plan, go over the stakeholder input that we received, highlight the key changes that were made from our current plan, and then go over the actual content of the draft plan. And then we will take any council feedback and discuss what the next steps will be. So why do we need a plan? Basically, I think the short answer is it provides a roadmap to help the council achieve progress toward long-term goals. It answers the questions of where are we going and how do we get there, helps align everyone toward a common purpose, and also creates opportunities to reevaluate goals and strategies. And it also serves as a useful communication tool because it helps the council to communicate its priorities and long-term goals to management partners and stakeholders. The strategic planning process has evolved over time. I would say it began back in 2011 when the council initiated a visioning project, which involved a lot of stakeholder outreach and engagement. In 2013, the council developed its first strategic plan based on all the input that was received. And that covered the years 2014 through 2018 initially, and then it was extended through 2019. And during 2019, we worked with a contractor, Michelle Duvall, many of you know here, to develop our current plan. And that has been in place since 2020. And this year, as you all know, we've been working on this draft. All right. So next, I am going to give a summary of the input that we received from stakeholders over the past few months. We held a public webinar on August 20th and also solicited written comments over a period of about 3 weeks. The public input is summarized on the following slides, but I would encourage you all to also read the comment letters and read the summary of the public webinar. And just want to note that many of the comments pertain to multiple goal areas, but I tried to summarize them under the 5 goal areas that we have in our existing plan, just to, kind of put them in that context so that you can keep those in mind as we go into the draft plan. But some of them pertain to, for example, science and management. So I, had to choose one or the other. Sorry, having clicker problems. Okay, there we go. All right, so the first goal area in our strategic plan is communication. Overall, we did not receive a lot of comments, positive or negative, related to the council's communication efforts or what should be in the next plan. One individual noted that the council needs to do a better job of communicating with people who are unfamiliar with the process. We could improve the accessibility of our documents, maybe reconsider the way we use acronyms or make sure that we're consistently defining acronyms and documents. Another individual suggested that the council could do a better job of communicating with the recreational community, specifically related to development of complex actions like the harvest control rule framework that had a number of very complex alternatives. And the council could improve its communication by developing outreach products to help people better understand the content of those actions and the potential implications. One specific recommendation that we received was that the council should meet fishermen where and when they're available to share information and gather input from a broader audience. They gave as an example the South Atlantic Council's port meetings that they've been holding as one potential example that the council could consider emulating. It's no surprise, we received quite a few comments related to science. And before I get into these, I just want to note that the council's science goal in our strategic plan covers science, everything related to science, research, data, and also monitoring and reporting. So it's pretty broad. One comment related to assessments. This commenter stated that frequent changes in assessment modeling approaches is creating inconsistency and less confidence in assessment results. They suggested that the council should advocate for continuing the use of the same model over time so that we can better track how that species performs over time. And they said this is especially true for species that are above their biomass target, such as black sea bass. Also, probably comes as no surprise, there were quite a few comments related to recreational data. Overall, this was a major concern for some commenters. One person stated that all other issues pale in comparison to MREP. A number of comments suggested that the council should pursue innovative opportunities to improve the reliability, accuracy, and precision of recreational data. A couple commenters suggested that the council should use emerging technologies like phone apps to improve collection of recreational data. Another commenter said the council should try to better understand the recreational sector's diverse motivations. They said catch and landing may not give a complete picture of the trickle-down social and economic benefits of recreational fishing. One commenter said the council should continue development of tools and modeling approaches that allow for better utilization of available recreational data. And they suggested continued refinement of the models that have been developed to support the recreational measure setting process framework. And then I think lastly, related to recreational issues, there was a suggestion from a couple individuals that the council consider mandatory permits for recreational anglers in the EEZ. And I just realized I used an acronym without defining it, so sorry about that. We received several comments related to monitoring and reporting, including reinstatement of did not fish reports. Council should review the permitting process for all managed fisheries in the Garfo Council region, and the council should review the monitoring and enforcement aspects of all fisheries in the region. All right. These are just a few final, or actually moving on to the management goals. I think I have 2 slides on these. One commenter stated that the council needs to consider the implications of management decisions for business owners when making management decisions. And they commented specifically on the negative impacts for hire operators, or they gave as an example when there's a sudden closure, a change in regulations, how that can have severe impacts for hire operators who might book trips out months in advance. They suggested that the council needs to do a better job of considering those impacts. There was one commenter who stated that the council should eliminate discards by requiring total retention of catch. And there was a recommendation that the council should go back and review management decisions and consider whether the right decision was made. And that commenter specifically suggested that the council look at the special management zone designations that were endorsed by the council I guess probably 8 or 9 years ago, and look at the impacts on commercial fisheries in that region and consider whether the right decision was made with those designations. We received several comments about how the council deals with climate change and fishing stocks. One commenter said the plan should outline specific objectives to deal with shifting stocks, including data sharing across councils, collaborative plans for managing shifting species, and general development of novel management approaches. Another commenter recommended that the council explore how to better factor in the risks of high variability in fishery productivity in its specifications and decision-making processes. We also heard one person commented that the private and for-hire sectors should be managed separately. Another person suggested that the idea of abundance should be prioritized and highlighted in the strategic plan. And then one person spoke on how recreational anglers have lost access to many fisheries through increasingly restrictive regulations. And they suggested that the council should be pushing harder toward maximum sustainable yield. That person also noted that that loss of access has been particularly difficult for shore-based anglers. There were quite a few comments on ecosystem-related topics. I think I have 4 slides here. Several comments on forage issues, including the plan should prioritize maintaining an abundant forage base. Council should continue to emphasize managed and unmanaged forage fish and ecosystem modeling and management. The council should work with NOAA Fisheries to improve the transparency of the exempted fishing permit process, especially for ecosystem component species, and that the council should consider explicit ecological reference points for forage and ecosystem component species. Okay. Related to EAFM and habitat, we heard comments that the plan should include additional forward-thinking goals for EAFM implementation, such as addressing governance barriers, developing strategies for addressing data gaps, and supporting the development of ecosystem modeling tools. A couple people mentioned how the council could better utilize state of the ecosystem reports. One individual suggested potentially creating on-ramps for utilization of this information in the decision-making process. And there was also a comment that the council's habitat protection efforts should be strengthened. Sorry for the delay. I'm having trouble getting this clicker to work the first time. We heard just a couple, not as many as I expected, comments on offshore wind. One person generally noted that it's a major concern for the industry. And one person commented that the council's existing wind efforts are appreciated. They suggested that the council could do more by disseminating peer-reviewed studies to help the public understand potential impacts of wind development. Lastly, under ecosystem, one person said that the plan should highlight specific concerns about aquaculture. They mentioned the potential for aquaculture development to impact both the council's fisheries and the broader ecosystem. There was a suggestion that the council should consider the impacts of chemical and plastic pollution on fisheries and the ecosystem. And a question was asked about whether the council can do anything to get Atlantic sturgeon off the endangered species list. This person noted that sturgeon is becoming a choke species for some fisheries. Under the governance category, I'll just note that many of the comments that I've mentioned under previous sections also have implications for governance. So we don't have a lot that's directly under this category, but there were a couple of comments about the council working more collaboratively with management partners to address management issues. One individual suggested that the council work with partners to create a cross-jurisdictional recreational advisory body, and yeah, generally working to enhance its coordination with neighboring councils. I think that is it for stakeholder input we received. Now I'm going to move into the actual content of the draft 2025 to 2029 plan. But first, I wanted to just define a few terms because different elements of strategic plans are sometimes used differently by different organizations. I kind of look at it as like an upside down triangle where it goes from the broad and general to the increasingly specific. So the vision is the council's long-term desired future state. The council's mission is why it exists and what it does. And then the core values are the deeply held principles that guide the council's work. So those are kind of the top of the triangle. Then the goals are broad long-term outcomes that the council aims to accomplish over time. And then the objectives are, I think of them as kind of like mini goals, but they're actions and approaches that will contribute to achieving the long-term goals. And then the strategies are the most specific element of the plan. And those are the specific steps or actions the council plans to take or could take to achieve goals and objectives identified in the plan. So this is just a quick summary of what has been updated. If you look at the red line version, it will look like a lot of red text, a lot has been deleted and a lot has been added. I think it probably is less than it appears to be, but we did make revisions throughout just to clean up the wording a little bit, make things more concise, or clarify the council's original intent with the wording of certain things. But we slightly reorganized and updated the text of the introduction section, made a relatively minor revision to the vision statement, no changes to the mission statement or core values, minor revisions to the communication and science goal statements, but not the other three goals, and then updated the objectives and strategies throughout to improve readability, reflect progress that's been made, and incorporate new challenges and opportunities that have been identified. And also to incorporate input received from council members at our June discussion and from stakeholders. So this is the proposed change to the vision statement. We talked about the vision statement a little bit in June. There was some discussion of removing the reference to fishing communities in the vision statement because fishing communities are often seen as being part of the fishery itself, but the council felt that it was important to keep communities as front and center in the council's strategic plan. So what we recommended is changing the vision statement to read healthy marine ecosystems, thriving fishing communities, and sustainable fisheries that provide the greatest overall benefit to the nation. So the rationale for this change is that it just makes it read a little bit more clearly and avoids saying fishing communities that provide the greatest overall benefit to the nation, because I think the intent, the council's intent originally, including the greatest overall benefit language, was to reference the Magnuson requirement. So that's our suggested wording. So same words as the original, just slightly reorganized. This is the council's existing mission statement and also the proposed mission statement for 2025 to 2029. unless anyone objects, I'm going to not read it out loud. Is that okay? All right.
Mary, hang on a second.
Very sorry to interrupt you, but do you want to go over that vision statement and get, as you go through these sections, do you want to get agreement from the council? Because if we get all the way to the end, folks may forget what they thought about the vision statement. So since that is a change, and since we had some discussion about it at the last council meeting, the last time you brought it up, I think it may be good just to go back and see, yeah, everybody likes the vision statement, then we can move on.
Good plan. All right. Got it up on the screen. So I don't have anything else to say about it. So I'll just open it for comments.
Chris,
I like it.
Joe,
Ditto. I like it too. I thought it was a good change.
Michelle,
I wish we could have just like a thumbs up emoji that we could just use around the table. But yes, I agree as well. I think it's a great change.
Mary, I think that was pretty easy.
There you go.
All right, then. Thank you all. So this is, Chris, do you want me to pause for comments on the mission statement or?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
Right. So we're proposing a revision to the strategic plan. So as you go through these sections, I think it's probably a good idea just to see if anyone has questions or comments about each section. Again, the mission statement's a pretty important, statement. And as you indicate here, we're not proposing any changes, but maybe someone has a better idea.
Is everyone happy the way it's written? Jim Gilmore?
Just a comment, and there might be some comments later on, but getting into governance and management, whatever, the Mid-Atlantic and, part of the council's structure right now, Mid-Atlantic manages now in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. And that coordination that's going to happen between New England Council and South Atlantic Council is where, having broader distribution of species. So, and that's something that was just a general comment. I was reading through it. It just kept focusing in on Mid-Atlantic, but we're getting so much entrenched with New England that's something that, I have no problem with the mission statement. It's just that the focus is the Mid-Atlantic, but now we've got a much broader mission than we had when Magnuson was first written. So just a comment.
So it's a good comment. And Mary and I struggle with Mid-Atlantic period, right? So if you paid attention to the changes to the introduction, initially we said the Mid-Atlantic Council states New York through North Carolina. Well, Magnuson doesn't define Mid-Atlantic Council as those states. North Carolina is part of the Mid-Atlantic Council, but go back to Magnuson, it's New York through Virginia. So we've had those kind of conversations. In this particular case, you bring up an important point, which is we're going to be involved in the management. We are involved in the management of fisheries that extend beyond the Mid-Atlantic. Bluefish is a prime example. So so that's the struggle. We need to highlight we're the Mid-Atlantic folks, but we do more stuff as well. We're involved with other fisheries as well. So I don't know how to handle that in the mission statement. I think if you drop out Mid-Atlantic region from here, that could be, an issue. But I don't know. I don't know if Mary has any ideas or wants to respond to that.
Well, I think it's a good point. I think that this language is, I wish I had Magnuson right in front of me, but it is challenging because the council has always managed fisheries beyond the Mid-Atlantic region. I think the council's core mission or the primary focus is on fisheries that are predominantly in the Mid-Atlantic region and then those that extend beyond. Sometimes with the issue of saying Mid-Atlantic fisheries, we've avoided that by saying council managed fisheries. So an objective or strategy might apply to whatever fisheries we are managing regardless of where it is. And I'll pause for other comments.
Jim?
just to follow, and I think it's fine. I wouldn't touch it. And, trust me, I've gone through mission statements where you wrapped around the axle for months. I think it's fine. It's just that we have to sort of recognize that. And when we start getting into some of the details later, I think there's some things that maybe needed to be added in, particularly, if we've got fisheries across two councils now, the conflict resolution part of it, if you got one council opposed to another, we got to start thinking about that. But I think this is fine and I wouldn't touch it. Thanks.
Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Jim raises a good point. There are other councils that have also had the same issue of managing beyond their boundaries. I mean, look at the South Atlantic, which manages, coastal migratory pelagic. So that's, king and Spanish mackerel, used to include Atlantic cobia till we dumped that on the ASMFC. So those fishery management plans extend, beyond the borders of the South Atlantic Council. Obviously there, have always been efforts, I think more so recently, to incorporate the concerns of the other regions that are, beyond the South Atlantic and, encompassing the rest of the management unit. So I think it is really difficult to try to address that, or when it can be very nuanced. So
Mike Louise?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also I agree with Jim too. I think there are a lot of questions out there, more so now than even just 10 years ago, about identity and who's in charge, right? Who's responsible? Where do I turn when I need something from on a particular matter? Stakeholders there's a lot of questions that are being raised about how our continued efforts as a Mid-Atlantic Council will be that work of today and beyond, and what changes are coming and what things we have to plan for. But I think it's really important, just with that blurred sense of, maybe I'm taking it too far. The identity piece, I think the Mid-Atlantic Council, in order to identify itself, needs to specifically mention its own entity as being the reason behind the mission, or being part of that mission. And therefore, I think leaving it alone with the understanding that has been discussed is plenty at this point. 5 years from now, we'll see. But for now, I think I'm comfortable with the way it's written now. Thanks.
So no objections, anything? Everybody's happy the way it is? Consensus? Okay. All right, Mary?
All right, next up is our core values, which, as I mentioned previously, those are the deeply ingrained values that guide all of the work the council does. These are also unchanged from the 2020 to 2024 plan. And the core values are stewardship, integrity, effectiveness, fairness, competence, and transparency. And I will pause there for comments.
I see none, Mary.
All right, so these are the 5 goal statements proposed in the draft plan, and I'm going to go through each of the goal sections and talk about the objectives, and then just a sort of summarized selection of strategies rather than reading through every strategy in the plan, because I don't think we have enough time for that. So if it's okay with you, I'm just going to highlight changes, a couple of very minor wording changes that were made at this point, and then I'll pause at the end of each goal section. So we recommended no changes to goals 3 through 5. For the communication goal, we recommended, based on council discussion and I believe consensus at the June meeting, a minor wording change. So instead of previously it said engage stakeholders in the public through education and outreach that foster sustained participation in and awareness of the council process. We removed the words education and changed foster to fosters. And the input that was provided by the council at that meeting was that highlighting education as part of our goal strategy, although education will remain a component of our communication and outreach efforts, but highlighting it at the front of the goal strategy might suggest that that people are just not informed enough to participate effectively in the council process, that it's just a lack of awareness or a lack of education, and sort of puts the burden of responsibility on the receiver of the information as opposed to the council as the deliverer of information. So education is still mentioned in our objectives and strategies, but has been removed from the goal statement. And then the science goal, just a very minor edit, instead of saying ensure that the council's management decisions, we just changed it to ensure that management decisions, because I think it is implied that it would be a council management decision since this is the council's strategic plan. So that's a pretty non-substantive edit. And I think contrary to my comments earlier, I will pause to see if there are any comments on those changes to the goal statements.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to comment. I'd gone through the strikeout version and everything, and where you had dropped out the education. I mean, it's still there. It's still within your objectives. It's still, you just redefined it. In fact, I like what you did, especially, or what staff did with putting in some specific examples in there, like MREP, EP. Jason and I had a discussion about IP and EP this morning. So MREP with the E. But you got those in there. We're still doing inform and educate the public about council managed species. That's in one of your strategies. So it's all still there. It's just, a better layout. So it looks good.
Seeing nobody online either, Mary. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thanks for those comments. All right, so I just read the communication goal, so I won't repeat it, but this this section of the plan will continue to have 3 objectives. The first, I think all of these have been reworded to some extent, but they maintain the initial sort of concept. So the first one is improve and increase communication with target audiences. The second objective is to increase stakeholder engagement in the management process. And the third objective is increase awareness and understanding of the council and its managed fisheries. And like I said, this will just be sort of a shortened selection of strategies to give the flavor of what is under these objectives, but you can look at the plan to see every single strategy in there. But strategies include employing a variety of communication tools and platforms, continued work to improve the website, routinely using our communication and outreach advisory panel to solicit input and improve our communication and outreach approaches, conducting early and proactive outreach during the development of council actions to engage affected and interested stakeholders, utilizing workshops and non-traditional meeting formats to engage stakeholders effectively, development of outreach products and resources to facilitate stakeholder engagement and inform and educate the public, and coordinating outreach efforts with partners. So there I'll pause, and I will also note that Stephen has the clean and the red line version of the plan. So if there is a need at any point, we can pull those up and look at the specific wording if anyone has wants to see that in front of them.
Michelle?
Just kudos for the changes that were made to this. I mean, I think, there's, the point of strategies is that you use them, you work through them, and then, when they are no longer relevant, you can move on to something that is going to be, more effective for achieving your objective and, eventually your goal. And so I think one thing I really appreciate is the addition of on it's like a third strategy, but coordinate communication efforts with science and management partners. I think, a lot of comments that we've received, over the past year and from the public input on the draft strategic plan have to do with communication about the science, and the public's concern about the science. And so I think that was a really important and subtle addition. Thank you.
I see no one else with a comment. All right.
Okay, that was easy. Moving on to science, the goal statement reads: ensure that management decisions are based on. That's good timing for John here to arrive. Ensure that management decisions are based on timely and accurate scientific information and method. The first strategy, or the first objective in this section, is sort of an umbrella objective that addresses how the council gets its research needs and priorities met. So it reads: collaborate with science partners and research institutions to ensure that the council's science priorities are addressed. The second objective is support the use and expansion of collaborative research to meet the council's science, data, and information needs. The next objective is promote efficient and accurate data collection, monitoring, and reporting systems. And then lastly, support the collection and use of relevant social and economic data and on-the-water observations. Strategies that are included under these objectives include development of a comprehensive research plan, supporting stock assessment improvements, working with partners to support collaborative research projects, working with partners to streamline and improve data reporting programs and address enforcement and compliance issues, exploring the utility of emerging technologies like phone apps to improve recreational reporting, supporting efforts to incorporate fishermen's knowledge in the stock assessment process, and supporting data collection efforts for improved social and economic impact analyses. And I will pause there. And again, just remind folks, these are paraphrased from the actual plan. So refer to the plan if you have particular wording suggestions.
Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mary. And I guess this was the one place I know, I think we'll get to some of the changes under the management goal that speak to sort of ensuring that our management approaches are robust and resilient to climate change. And I think, I was struggling a little bit here with maybe how to weave into not necessarily the goal statement, but maybe some of the strategies or, a couple of the objectives, the idea of having, the idea of ensuring that our science enterprise and the investments that we're making in that can also be, resilient or flexible as we grapple with the impacts of climate change on our, on that enterprise itself. I think we've discussed a lot of this during the climate change scenario planning process. And, I want to be mindful of not, I think, repeating or blurring, to use Mike Luisi's word, the lines between the science and management and some of the strategies that have been incorporated under the management goals, speaking to that robustness and resilience. And I know, there's a climate, ecosystem, and fisheries initiative that, speaks to both the management piece as well as the science piece. I think one of the things I was playing around with was whether, say, for example, the objective that is promote efficient and accurate data collection, monitoring, and reporting systems. If perhaps we add on to that are, robust to climate change or can accommodate, effects of climate change on those systems, or something along those lines that we might be able to weave in the theme of having that science enterprise be resilient to climate change impacts. So I'm not doing a very good job of articulating what it is I'm trying to get at. I hope folks around the table here and online maybe understand the sense of what I'm trying to do, and maybe the strategies as they've been modified, which I appreciate all the work that you and other staff have gone to update these. I think you've done an excellent job, but maybe that's already implicit in the way that these are worded. But I just wanted to raise the issue and maybe see what other folks thought. Thank you.
Joe?
I have to make sure it's which Joe it is sometimes. It's all good. It just may be a little too specific or in the weeds. I'm going to try and avoid that. But under first objective, the second strategy, conduct a mid-cycle review of the council's 5-year research priorities. Just like to hear a little bit more about that particular idea, because it's somewhat specific, but then again, it's not, we're dealing with a 5-year plan, mid-cycle review, like, okay, so every year 3, we're going to go through, and I mean, sometimes it takes a couple of years to get a research priority actually rolling. So by the time you're doing the review, you really, I'm trying to understand that particular one.
So that is an adaptation of a strategy that we had that we have in the current plan. I should have mentioned this when I presented these slides. The current plan includes an objective related to the council's research priorities. It's like develop 5-year research priorities or something like that. We took that out and nested some of the strategies under the first objective in the science section now. I kind of want to phone a friend, Brandon, if he's online, because he's the one who, oh, his hand is up. All right.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Joe, for the question. Yeah, as Mary had indicated, we do have something similar in our, can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
If you're speaking, we can't hear you. Yeah.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Oh, weird. I could attempt an answer. Well, if some troubleshooting is
Can you hear
needed,
me?
or Chris,
Yep.
do you want to?
Chris, you want to go ahead and take a shot at it?
Yeah. So I'll be a poor substitute for Brandon, but Mary, you can, if I miss anything, you can jump in. So we talked about this one quite a bit. So we have a requirement to develop 5-year research priorities. The council does that. And then to your point, exactly the point that I thought about, like if you say that you're going to do this for the next 5 years and get people focused on research and they start doing the research, in year 2, you're going to say, not so much. No, you're not going to do that, right? But I think it is fair to say, like halfway through, check on progress, see how things are going, see if there's anything else that we really want to add, like midterm. I think that's fair, So I think, Mary, is there anything else that?
I think also one of the reasons why that was initially suggested was to avoid having it just get put up on a shelf and forgotten about for 5 years. So part of it is just to keep it front and center and to remind folks that we have it and remind management partners that these are our priorities. So I think if anything, things might be added. It seems unlikely that something would be just fully struck from the document. Brandon can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the intent at the midpoint is to fully overhaul the document, but just to kind of check in, see what's been done, and remind people that it exists. Stephen, do you want to try and see if Brandon can talk now?
Can you all hear me?
Want to try again, Brandon?
Yep, I'm trying. Can folks hear me? Checking.
Still nothing. So, but
Anybody? Can you hear me?
I don't know. I think we're good. I think we got a pretty good answer on everything that we needed anyway. I think everybody's clear on that. All right, Mary.
All right. Would you like me to move on to management, or was there anything else to cover under, were there any other comments under science?
Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mary. My question is regarding emergency technology such as cell phone reporting and stuff like this. Are states working on this for their own state reporting requirements? Is this an initiative that would come from, say, National Marine Fisheries Service, or would it come from ACCSP? I just want to make sure that it's a regionalized technology that's embraced by not only the states, but in coordination with the South Atlantic and with New England Fisheries Management Councils, so that there's one app for all three of the regions. I know that people move around from state to state to state to have to look on your phone for the different apps where you need to report. That's a pain, and nobody's really going to do that. But if there's one app that covers all the areas, all the regions, state waters and federal waters also, maybe that's where we should be looking at when it comes to emerging technologies. Because if we do it piecemeal, it's going to fall apart and there's going to be problems and nobody's going to want to do it. So, thought and a comment.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to circle back to Michelle's comment, and she left her comment with a question, in terms of what we should do. I think to answer you, I think there's an implicit focus on what I think you were trying to say. And we've talked about like sprinkling the words adaptive capacity, increasing our adaptive capacity somewhere throughout this. And I think Mary found a couple places to do that. But if in fact we need to make it more explicit, right, in terms of how we're handling climate change, fisheries, all the things that we're going to be involved with over the next 5 years, I struggle with where to put it. Like, what do we do? So is there a missing strategy? I don't think so. I mean, missing objective? I don't think so. Are we missing a strategy? Maybe, right? Maybe. But we have a lot in the other sections that might address some of your concerns. So all that suggests that I don't know what to do with your comment.
Michelle?
Well, I just wanted to make you think, and I wanted to get you to say something like that. So, and maybe I was just going back and looking at the language that's under the strategic landscape that's in the preamble at the beginning, and changing ocean conditions that impact, the distribution, productivity, and sustainability of managed species. Maybe there's room in there in that particular bullet, changing ocean conditions that impact the distribution, productivity, sustainability, and the data collection capabilities, or something in there that's maybe a little bit broader that can maybe address that, but it doesn't have to be something that's sprinkled throughout different strategies or any changes to objectives or anything like that. I don't know. I can think about it a little bit and maybe circle back with Mary online. I don't want to hold up this discussion here. So, but thanks.
Mike Luisi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I don't want to hold up the discussion either. When Peter was asking his question, I had a little light bulb go off and I thought I might be able to help answer your question, but now I don't remember what the question was. If you could just
Are states developing technology for state reporting requirements of fisheries? Or is this a NIMS initiative, or is this an ASSCP initiative? Just having a number of different technologies that people need to have in their pockets, and having to go find an app depending upon what state I'm fishing in to report my landing, that's going to be a pain in the neck. If there's one app that's regional in association with the South Atlantic and the New England Council, where it's one app shopping, and maybe you even have conversations with HMS, and it's HMS reporting also, and it's off of one app, and it's on your phone. And when you open your phone, that app's there, and you can press that without having to go through your phone and look for the different apps that you have for different regions where you're fishing. That was my question. It's a question if that's being developed on a regional basis or if it's on a piecemeal basis.
So you're talking mostly recreational then? Yeah, I think there are a lot of being involved in how we're going to better collect recreational data in Maryland, specifically involved in that. There are more than you can count numbers of ways of collecting the information. From my perspective, from an administrator at the state government level, it's a lot likely that we're going to wait until someone out there decides there's one app. I think all the states are actively moving in their own directions. Perhaps something like ACCSP might be the centralized hub where all of this information initially goes to, so that you can find it if you need it. But I don't think that all of the states are going to. We can hardly agree. That's one of those challenges that we're not going to find common ground between all the East Coast states on a particular fishing app that helps with data collection. That's just my opinion. Commercially, we're going different on that. It's very likely we'll have a one-stop shop at some point down the road. I know Garfo and the service are working on that.
Yeah, and I just would say that my question revolves around the bullet point, which is specific to recreational fishing, because I was just up in Massachusetts. I could have been fishing for codfish. Now I got to go find their app. I'm in New Jersey. I'm fishing for striped bass, which is not necessarily New Jersey, but they're going to want to know. I'm out black sea bass fishing. Now I've got to find another app. I'm off in New York and I'm black sea bass fishing. I got to find another app and report it. It's just going to be so cumbersome and negative for users to interface with, that it should really be a regional approach to this with state input. Develop your own, and then when this regional approach happens, maybe it's launched with the blessing of all the states. That's all. It's going to take time. Thanks.
Seeing nothing else on the science strategy highlights. Go ahead, Mary. Move on.
All right. Thank you all for those comments. Moving on to management, the goal statement remains develop effective management strategies that provide for sustainable fisheries and healthy marine ecosystems while considering the needs of fishing communities and other resource users. The first objective under this goal statement is strengthen state, federal, and interstate partnerships to promote coordinated, efficient, and effective management of fishery resources. The next objective is develop management approaches that are adaptable and robust to the impacts of climate change. The next objective is adapt management approaches and priorities to address emerging issues and changing conditions. And then finally, the last objective in this section is ensure that social, economic, and community impacts and opportunities are considered in management decisions. And I wanted to note that what I would think of as the primary objective in the plan related to climate change has been moved from the ecosystem section to the management section. This is intended to reflect the increasing focus on climate change and climate ready fisheries. And also, as in the current plan, a lot of the climate strategies were sort of conceptual. ideas about how to change, and a lot of work has been done over the last 5 years through scenario planning and other collaborative efforts. And so we have a lot more specifics now. And when we looked at those specifics, it just made more sense to include it under the management section because it is kind of a core part of the council's management approach. So strategies included in this goal section include development of a framework for monitoring changes in species distribution, coordinating Inflation Reduction Act funded projects to support climate-ready fisheries, working with partners to address scenario planning outcomes, development of a process and timeline to review the outcomes of past management decisions, expanding the use of management strategy evaluations, and evaluating the impacts of management decisions on relevant sectors. And I will pause there for comments and feedback.
Jim Gilmore.
Thanks, Chairman. And Mary, I think the words are phenomenal. They really captured everything. But then when I woke up from my nap from sleeping too much, whatever, and I started thinking about this, it raised some questions. So first, Mike, I don't know if you hit the nail on the head. You said 10 years ago. So it was in March of 2014 that Garfo brought us all down to DC to talk about this new thing, climate change, that was emerging. And John Hare did some great presentations at that meeting and sort of opened our eyes. And as I remember the takeaways from that, besides the fact that there was in a breakout group, there was a whole bunch of climate deniers in that room. And it's like, why are we wasting our time on this? It's not even worth talking about. But the two themes that came out of it was, in terms of management and maybe governance, was that the commission was relatively set up for it because of the structure of it. But the councils had an issue because of that dividing of who's in charge of what species. So, and these are rhetorical questions. I don't expect answers from them, but the points I came from it after we walked out of the room was, well, first off, how far have we gotten in 10 years on those issues that we really needed to look at management and governance if species are going to be moving. And I'll catch up on that at some point because I'm thinking a little bit behind. But when I looked at 9.2 in here, which is, the wording's perfect, but under 9.2, what would this actually look like? And how long would it take if we start talking about really trying to restructure how we manage things? And is it even possible? And if you go to the later sections, 19.3 and 20, they talk about, well, we're going to all sit down and figure this out. And what popped in my head was, we can't redo allocations. And now we're going to talk about this. So it's, again, rhetorical questions at this point. I think it's the issues we need to address, but we really need to start getting into, is this actually something we're going to be able to accomplish? And again, through the next 5 years, I hope we move the needle a little bit so we actually start dealing with this as opposed to it's coming. So thanks.
Peter Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is in regards to the Inflation Reduction Act #2 on your timeline, or on your list here. Isn't there an end date to the Inflation Reduction Act's money that has to be utilized? And does this bullet point take that into consideration? I forget what the title of this whole thing was, but we're looking at management of strategy evaluation for the next period of years. Does that take into consideration that period of years, or are those initiatives going to run out of funds before they're completed?
Mary.
Yeah, so the Inflation Reduction Act projects should be completed within the next 5 years. So, I mean, but I don't think that's a problem. I think that's something that hopefully we could check the box on when we get to the end of the 5-year period. But also, some implicit in some of those projects, or I mean, sometimes it's stated, is that there's council work to be done at the completion of the project. So one of the projects would, I think it said, like, this is intended to inform potential council development of a policy on maybe cross-jurisdictional fisheries or something like that. So there are council next steps that could occur as, follow-ons to those projects.
Thank you.
Chris?
So yeah, thanks, Peter, for the question, and thanks, Mary. So we have to use the money up by the end of 27. So it's still a little bit uncertain, but by 2027, all the money that we've gotten, the $2.3 million has to be spent, right? So I think Mary's point is a good one in the sense that those projects will be done, but they're going to be outcomes from those projects that are going to basically stimulate council activities in 2028, 2029. So I think that's what we're trying to capture with that particular strategy.
Hopefully by 2029, my kids don't take my driver's license from me.
Anything else for Mary on this? Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, moving on to the ecosystem section. This structure of the objectives is pretty much the same as before, minus the climate one, which was moved. So the goal statement reads, support the ecologically sustainable utilization of living marine resources in a manner that maintains ecosystem productivity, structure, and function. And the objectives under this goal statement are implement the council's ecosystem approach to fisheries management, or EAFM, as described in the EAFM guidance document. Identify, designate, and protect fish habitat. Engage in the offshore energy development process to address impacts to council-managed species and associated habitats. Support the maintenance of an adequate forage base to ensure ecosystem productivity, structure, and function, and develop management approaches that minimize adverse ecosystem impacts. And I will just note before moving on to the strategies that when we developed the last plan, we looked closely at the EAFM guidance document and tried to structure the objectives pretty similarly to how that guidance document is structured. And we pulled in as many specifics from that as we could, just to kind of align priorities across these documents. So strategies included under across these objectives include conduct a comprehensive review of the council's EAFM guidance document, review and strengthen essential fish habitat designations, comment on proposed offshore energy and development projects as needed, consider the role of council-managed species in the ecosystem and the impact of council-managed fisheries on the forage base, and develop management measures that consider ecological interactions to reduce regulatory discards, promote greater utilization of catch, and minimize impacts to habitat. So that's just sort of a sampling, but there is more and more specifics in the actual plan. I'll pause for comments.
Jim?
Just a very minor one. Is there a way we can, in acronym reduction, can we have we have ecosystem-based fisheries management, we have ecosystem-based management, now we have ecosystem, what's the new one, EAFM? Can we just call it one thing instead of having another acronym to the list? Just a suggestion.
Chris?
So I turn to the science guy to respond to that, but each one of those is very different, and John can explain it better than I.
Yeah, I mean, each one is very different. I agree with Jim's point, is it gets confusing. And so I think who's the audience of this document? Is it, for the experts, technical experts, or is it for a general audience? And so general, I would just say ecosystem approaches. if you're looking to sort of dig into the expertise, ecosystem approaches to fisheries management is sort of conducting fisheries management as you do now, single species, and adding in ecosystem information. Ecosystem-based fisheries management is working at a scale, multi-species management, or it's management at a guild level. Ecosystem-based management is sort of bringing fisheries and offshore wind and marine carbon dioxide renewable all together. So technically they're different. But I agree in terms of trying to communicate that and succinctly, perhaps you could just use ecosystem approaches.
I see no more comments, Mary.
So regarding terminology, I will just note that it can be a little, I do agree with simplifying wherever possible, because the EAFM, which is very hard to say, EAFM guidance document is a specific document with a title, it becomes a little more challenging. And I worry that if we just change it to implement ecosystem approaches, then we're moving from what is kind of a specific strategy toward something that's general and harder to track progress on, which is kind of the intent of the plan. So there's kind of a trade-off between clarity and ease of communication and actual ability to implement the plan and say whether we've accomplished something or not. And I think since there were no more comments on that, John's got a comment.
I mean, your answer, Mary, sounds like having the technical definition is appropriate, because it does, you are parsing out sort of different activities related to those different, terms.
All right, thank you. Finally, we have reached the governance section, and I will note that in our plans, we've used the term governance in a, I don't want to say unconventional, but a slightly more broad way than it's sometimes used, because often organizations use governance just to define kind of how the organization is structured and how it works. And in all of the council's the two plans to date, and then the draft plan, we have also encompassed how the council engages with stakeholders and incorporates stakeholder interests into the council process. So I just wanted to make that note before diving in. The governance goal, unchanged from the current one, reads, ensure that the council's practices accurately represent and consider the interests of fisheries, fishing communities, and the public through a transparent and inclusive decision-making process. In the goals, the objectives under this goal read, the first one is maintain an open, accessible, and clearly defined process. The next one is enhance the efficiency and adaptability of the council process, enhance coordination and collaboration with management partners, ensure that stakeholder interests are understood and meaningfully considered, and then finally, provide training and development opportunities for council members and staff to enhance organizational performance. Strategies, there we go. Okay, strategies included under these objectives include development of a repository for council procedural documents. That was one of the recommendations of many from the Parnan review that we discussed at the last meeting. And then the next strategy is related, and that's kind of a catch-all for many of the other recommendations. And that is prioritize and implement as appropriate the recommendations identified in the MAFMC/GARFO council process review. Then develop and revise agreements with management partners to clarify roles and responsibilities, collaborate with partners on climate-related issues, encourage stakeholder input at appropriate points in the decision-making process, and provide feedback on how their input was used, and provide training opportunities for council members and staff. And I will just note that there is kind of some overlap between our governance and our communication strategies. And I think that's kind of acknowledged in the wording of a couple of the actual strategies. But given the extensive amounts of feedback that we have received from stakeholders about the importance of soliciting their input and seeking to understand stakeholder interests and how their perspectives influence management decisions, we felt it's appropriate to have those reflected in both the communication and governance strategies. But that is why you see some kind of similar wording across those two goal areas. And I will pause there for comments.
Mike Elise.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a comment that I think this is related to somewhat kind of going where Jim Gilmore was going earlier. Governance, when you hear the word governance, and I mean, it's not very exciting, right? It's process, it's how you get things done. And in the past, I personally haven't, I appreciate the system that we're in and the governance structure, but it was never anything that was a highlight. I do feel, however, that this next 5 years, and this is where Jim was getting, I think, with the interests of the other organizations along the East Coast that are part of the fisheries management process, I think governance is going to start to find itself higher and higher on people's lists of things that they want to focus on, especially when it comes to climate changes, shifting stocks, who gets to make decisions, who doesn't get to raise their hand at a meeting. It's going to elevate. I believe, I see that coming in the next few years, and I think the way that this is currently structured, it captures that planned interest, I guess, nicely, and I'm happy with the way it's outlined. Thanks.
See no one else, Mary.
Okay. So my next slide is going to be about, oops, nope, it's not. It's, I forgot I had this one. This is just a graphic that gives kind of a bird's eye view of the objectives. And I thought if there were extensive council discussion about elements of the plan, this might be helpful for us just to have as a reference point, but I don't think, it doesn't sound like we're going in that direction. But I did, Michelle, I think, was going to suggest maybe that we could add some text to the strategic landscape to address the point that she was making earlier. And she sent some draft text. So I just wanted to see, before we move on to like the very final slide, if Michelle, if you want to circle back to that.
Sure. So I guess there were a couple different ways that I thought we could add to this bullet that's under the strategic landscape that currently is changing ocean conditions that impact the distribution, productivity, and sustainability of managed species. And I thought that might be an ideal place to perhaps try to, capture that, those changing ocean conditions are also going to affect the science enterprise as well. So, I mean, the simplest would just be to say changing ocean conditions that impact the distribution, productivity, sustainability, and science for managed species. That would be pretty simple. You could also say, data collection approaches for managed species or data collection systems for managed species. So those were just a few things I wanted to throw out there for, a way to try to, address that, it's not just our management that's going to be affected by climate change, but I think also our science and data collection. So reactions, whatever, I think if folks want to chew on it, I don't know, Mary, like I know we were potentially slated to take final action on the strategic plan. Today, I don't know if people might feel a little bit more comfortable just seeing something like that in writing, prior to approval, but just, I guess, leave that to you and Chris.
Well, we don't necessarily have to to approve this today. They can always come back in December. And yeah, with a few minor changes and get that updated. Chris?
So there's an alternative path, given how fresh this is in our mind. We're having the conversation now. Sounds like we have a very minor revision from my perspective, an important revision, a minor revision that I like. I think we can get it up there, let folks see it. I think that's the only real revision that we have to this document today. And if that's true, then I think, from my perspective, it'd be great if you all could just consider it and decide whether or not you want to adopt it today with that revision. So I think, Mary, can you put the revision up?
Oh, yes, I can, I will grab that text and put it up on a slide. And in the meantime, I don't know if there is a need for additional council discussion on anything else, or if we want to see if there are comments from the public, either in person or online, but I'll get that text up in just 1 second.
Any more comments from around the table? Any comments from anyone online? If you do, just raise your hand. Kate Wilkie.
Hi, Wes. Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is Kate Wilkie speaking on behalf of the Nature Conservancy. I just want to commend the council and the council staff for a really comprehensive, well-articulated strategic plan. I think there's been a lot of good feedback and discussion around desired changes today. In previous public comment periods, and then more discussion today. And it seems like the red line changes in the document have been pretty responsive to that discussion and public feedback. I particularly appreciate that the plan contains an extensive suite of actions in pursuit of resilience for fisheries, fishing communities, and governance in response to climate change. In addition to climate change, I think that recreational data challenges, which have impacts on management, are certainly one of the major challenges that the plan should address, especially focusing on novel approaches to using technology. And as I was reading the plan, I did find myself wondering, how does the council plan to do some of these things? And to Peter's question about about recreational fishing apps, obviously there's a lot to discuss there, and there's not a lot in the strategic plan about how some of these things will be pursued. But I would think and hope that more of the detail about how to do these things would appear in the annual implementation plans, such that those implementation plans support and drive toward the objectives in the strategic plan. So anyway, just overall, I wanted to express my support on behalf of the Nature Conservancy for a really solid strategic plan. Thanks.
See no more comments online. Mary, have you got it?
So this change would, this is existing text that's in the introduction under strategic landscape that highlights various challenges. And so there's several bullets. I did not include the bullets that come before this, but I believe Michelle was suggesting just adding and science or and data collection and data collection approaches for managed species, either one.
Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, science is certainly the simplest approach. I see a thumbs up from Chris, and that probably encompasses a lot more than, data collection approaches. So that would be my preference.
Yeah. Everybody happy with this? I'm seeing thumbs up and head nodding around the table. Anything further you need to bring for us, Mary?
So does the council wish to approve the document as modified today, or would you like to wait and see a final? I mean, it's a pretty minor revision, but are you comfortable with approving this today?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm absolutely comfortable in knowing Chris. If we want to keep him happy and not have him put this on the agenda for December, we can vote it up today. It'll be a better day for Chris. So I'd make the motion. I'd move to approve the 2025 through 2029 Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council Strategic Plan as modified today.
Yeah. Jim Gilmore with a second. Any discussion on the motion? Peter Hughes?
I do. I have a question, and if you could somehow remove this and put that new language there, because I did not write it down.
Stephen, can you go back to the PowerPoint? Or actually, I can just copy and paste it into the Word document if that's easier.
There you go.
1 second.
Yep, that's perfect. And I support the changes to the document here today, but changing ocean conditions that impact distribution, productivity, sustainability, and science for managed species, fully supportive of that. How does that interplay with Magnuson reference to overfishing and overfishing is occurring? I mean, is there some interplay there that those are the words that we live by, and we have some fisheries right now that are currently under that terminology. And even though we're addressing them through basically this change, I'm just wondering if there's any correlation there or should there be reference there, but I am supportive of this. So thank you.
Michelle? Chris?
So from my perspective, Peter, it's a good point, but it's implied in this particular bullet and the other ones that are in that list. So I think we're good, right? So if you look at it just if you step back and just read this and you say, okay, next 5 years is going to be, challenging for the council because we're going to have changing ocean conditions that impact all these things, right? Those are going to influence our decisions relative to the things you mentioned, right? Now, do we have an overfish condition that we have to respond to? Is overfishing happening, for some reason? Anyway, I think we're good.
Any further discussion on the motion? Any objection to the motion? Seeing none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you very much, Mary.
Thank you.
Chris Moore.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Mary for all her hard work. This was her job in developing the strategic plan for 25 through 29. She did an excellent job, and I want to thank you all for your discussion and conversation today. This is, again, a very important document for the council. It's going to drive our activities for the next 5 years. So thank you very much.
All right, with that, let's take a little break. Let's come back at 2:35 and we'll make sure we have presenters online ready to go. All right, we'll see everybody in 11 minutes.
We got cookies to celebrate us.
And supposedly cookies out in the lobby.
If Heather, Lisa, and Doug, who are going to be presenting online later, if you can hear this now and you want to test your audio while we're on the break, go for it. Maybe it's kind of noisy in the room right now with people milling around, but maybe if you, cool, Doug raised his hand. So yeah, raise your hands and then I'll call on you and we'll test your audio. So Doug, go ahead.
Hey, Julia, can you hear me?
Yep, you sound good.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Lisa, you want to give it a test?
Hi, Julia, Lisa here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good.
Awesome, thank you.
Heather, you want to give it a try?
Sure, thank you. How's it coming through?
Yep, you sound good.
Excellent, thanks.
And we have all your slides, so we should be good to go. I assume we'll share all the slides and y'all can just say next slide.
Sounds good. And you want us to keep cameras off?
Sorry, it's kind of noisy in the room with people chatting. Did you say keep cameras off?
Correct.
Yes, you might not even have an option to turn it on, but yeah, people keep their cameras off to help with bandwidth for these meetings.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. We'll get going in a little bit. You have to put it kind of hard.
Oh,
Hey, Brandon, you want to check your audio again? We think we might have it figured out over here. So not just yet. Hey, Paul Rego, can you check your audio?
All right, can you hear me? Quick check.
Try again, Paul.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks. Just checking.
Okay, thanks.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's get started with our next agenda item, offshore wind update. For this part of the meeting, I'm going to recuse myself. I'm a named plaintiff in a lawsuit currently going on. So I am going to step away from the table. And Mike Luisi, you're in charge.
I appreciate that a lot, Wes. Thanks. Exciting. No, glad to help. Okay, so we're going to jump in to our afternoon session with wind, starting with an update. We have Kirby Roots-Murdy and Alex Schneider with us from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. So I'm going to turn things over to Kirby and Alex for the presentation. Just want to say hi. Ended up having lunch with Kirby, an old-time colleague from ASMFC days, and many of you remember Kirby's now with BOEM. So whenever you're ready, Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Let's see if I can advance these slides. I think I was told I need to point it directly at Jason's head. That didn't work. Okay. Stand by. Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Kirby Roots-Murdy. I'm a renewable energy program specialist at BOEM, working in the Office of Renewable Energy Programs. And as mentioned, I'm here today with my colleague, Alex Schneider, and we'll be providing an update on a few topics requested by the Mid-Atlantic Council staff. So on the screen are topics that Alex and I will be tag teaming. I'll provide an update on the Central Atlantic lease sales in August, followed by the Central Atlantic 2 call for information and nominations, and then cover project-specific updates on Empire Wind, Atlantic Shores, P1, Project 1 and 2, formerly referred to as Atlantic Shores South, and Maryland Wind, and then hand it over to Alex to present on some of our BOEM studies. Okay, so BOEM's most recent round of planning in the Central Atlantic, referred to as the Central Atlantic 1, resulted in lease sales on August 14th. Multiple ocean user and natural resource conflicts limit identification of suitable habitat, or acreage, but 2 offshore wind leases were ultimately determined and an auction was held. On the screen, I've provided the distance from shore for those lease areas, the total acreage of each, as well as the sale amount. So starting first with lease area 0557, in terms of its area or acreage, it's 101,443 acres, with the western border of the lease area approximately 26 nautical miles from the Delaware Bay. And the winning bid for that lease was approximately $75 million. For lease area 0558, the acreage is 176,505 acres, with the western border of that lease area approximately 35 nautical miles from the Chesapeake Bay, and the winning bid for that was approximately $17.6 million. The auction for those 2 lease areas netted a total of $92,651, $501 million in high bids. So while advancements for these lease areas support the Central Atlantic states' offshore wind energy goals, we know that they, when paired with existing lease areas in the region, are not sufficient to fully meet those states' targets. Which brings us to the Central Atlantic 2 call for information and nominations. If you're looking on the screen right now, you should be able to see the checkered polygon, though it's a little tough with the lighting in here right now. On the right side of the screen shows that area that's off of the
Eastern Seaboard. So over the next few slides, I'll give an overview of the process, highlight some of BOEM's leasing schedule and drivers for this second call, and then go into our recent outreach events and next steps. All right. So in April of this year, Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland announced the new 5-year offshore wind lease schedule that it's intended to provide an outlook on offshore wind lease sales that BOEM is planning. The schedule is also to provide transparency to ocean users for upcoming offshore wind lease planning efforts, as well as provide certainty to the industry and supply chain regarding new projects that will be on the horizon across regions. Focusing on the Central Atlantic 2 lease, which is the blue bar on the figure, based on our planning process, BOEM may hold an auction of leases from this effort, likely in mid-2026. But you can also see through this figure and the schedule a good breakdown of other upcoming activities that BOEM is planning for over the next few years. So in terms of moving into drivers, last year and earlier this year, the states of Maryland and North Carolina expressed to BOEM the need for additional lease areas to meet their respective states' offshore wind energy goals. And in response, BOEM held exploratory discussions with states regarding a second round of planning in the region. Through those conversations, the following drivers were identified. North Carolina is seeking about 3 gigawatts of remaining capacity to meet their goal, and the state has expressed interest in exploring the full outer continental shelf offshore of North Carolina beyond Cape Hatteras, which was the original planning boundary for the Central Atlantic 1 call process. Maryland is seeking between 1.5 to 4 gigawatts and has expressed interest in exploring areas further to the north of the original Central Atlantic call areas, as well as the deep water call areas from that process. Within the last few months, Delaware signed into law the ability for the state to procure up to 1.2 gigawatts of offshore wind. And lastly, just to note, Virginia has indicated that through the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project, referred to as CVAL, and recent lease sale, they're likely have satisfied their current state goals. So given the interest in expanding the planning for Central Atlantic 2 to the north of Delaware Bay, specifically in between the Central Atlantic 1 and New York Bight call areas, BOEM has also unfolded New Jersey into the conversation and ultimate call area. So in terms of terminology, let's see here. Give me 1 second. There we go. Quick refresher. BOEM undertakes a winnowing process and moving from a planning area to a lease area or a set of lease areas. And those lease areas are subject to an auction and subsequent potential future development of renewable energy projects, depending upon BOEM review and environmental analysis. And as you can see through this process, it's really a continuous reduction in area to reduce conflicts towards the most compatible lease areas. So as you can see, we start with our planning area, we move through an RFI, and then the call area, which is the stage we're at currently with the Central Atlantic 2 process. And then from there, we move down to what is going to be wind energy areas and subsequently potential lease areas. So to aid us in getting to the wind energy areas, BOEM has partnered with NOAA's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, or NCOS, to use the best available science and data through spatial modeling to inform this wind energy area, or WEA, identification. BOEM and NCOS are planning to build upon the spatial model that was developed for the Central Atlantic 1 process. And I want to point out that current data being considered for the suitability modeling effort can be found on BOEM's website and is referenced in the Federal Register notice. And we welcome feedback on that data that's currently under consideration. And we expect that the public input during our current call comment period, as well as feedback we've received to date, will inform that modeling and ultimately decisions on the draft wind energy areas. And BOEM is committed to ensuring that the draft wind energy areas will be made available for public review. And in our next steps, you'll be hearing a little bit more about that. Just give me a second as we advance. All right. An important element of the call process is incorporating information from our previous efforts, in particular the Central Atlantic One. And that includes a review of inputs related to recreational and commercial fisheries, marine habitats, natural resources, protected species, industry, and navigation. And in addition to this information described within the Federal Register notice, we also published a series of maps on BOEM's website that reflect some of the major specific areas we are aware of that we've received feedback on from our previous engagement efforts on Central Atlantic One. The currently open public comment period provides an opportunity for new feedback or updates or revisions or expansions of those past comments and feedback we've received to broaden the geographic scope of the call area and potential development of available new data to consider in the planning process. So as I'm trying to get the slide to advance, I will note again on the screen is, I think, a good breakdown on the right, a figure showing, or the map shows kind of a number of different data layers that we are evaluating and taking into consideration as we move from a call area to wind energy area. Yeah, sure. Let's go next. Perfect. All right. So last week we held our 8th outreach meeting associated with the Central Atlantic 2, which began with the Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Task Force meeting on September 10th and 11th. That was attended by over 200 individuals. That was then followed by 2 weeks of on the road, in-person meetings that began in Morehead City, North Carolina, and ended in Atlantic City, New Jersey. In total, over 570 individuals attended the in-person meetings last month, and our final formal public outreach meeting was held last Wednesday, virtually online, and was attended by about 194 participants, and we had almost 40 people provide comments and some questions during that. You go to the next slide. All right, so I'll wrap up on Central Atlantic 2 that the timeline, as I was kind of talking through a little bit, we had our call for information nominations published in the Federal Register on August 22nd. We are going through a public comment period right now that will end in about a week's time. And so we intend to conduct a series of engagement meetings on the draft wind energy areas that will be likely identified and published in the first quarter of 2025. From there, in late 2025 to 2026, there will likely be a proposed sale notice with a 60-day comment period, followed by our final sale notice and likely hold auction, which would be at some point in the middle of 2026. So that wraps up some of the key milestones and drivers for the Central Atlantic 2 call process. And I'll move into some project-specific updates next. Next slide. All right. So starting off first with Empire Wind, the construction and operations plan for Empire Wind project was approved back in February, on February 22nd, 2024. I wanted to note this one because I think the last time I came and presented in front of the Mid-Atlantic Council, it had not quite reached that stage, but the approved plan includes construction operations of 2 offshore wind facilities known as Empire Wind 1 and 2. And the lease area is located about 12 nautical miles south of Long Island and about 16.9 nautical miles east of Long Branch, New Jersey. The record of decision for this project approved construction of 147 wind turbines within the lease area. And together, these projects would have a total capacity of just over 2,000 megawatts, or about 2 gigawatts of renewable energy that BOEM estimates will power more than 700,000 homes. Next. All right, our next one is Atlantic Shores South Projects 1 and 2. So just last week, BOEM announced the approval of the construction and operations plan for these two projects, which authorizes construction of 2 offshore wind facilities across both of them. Together, these projects will have a total capacity of 2.8 gigawatts of renewable energy that is estimated to power close to 1 million homes. The project is approximately 8.7 miles offshore New Jersey at its closest point, and it will, the COP, construction operations plan, includes a proposal of up to 197 total positions for wind turbine generators, offshore substations, as well as a meteorological tower and subsea cables that will make landfall in Atlantic City and Seagirt, New Jersey. And then next, we'll wrap up our project-specific updates, and I'll turn it over to Alex. On September 5th, BOEM announced through a record of decision approval of the Maryland offshore wind project. It's the nation's 10th commercial scale offshore wind energy project, and it will generate approximately 2 gigawatts of renewable energy for the Delmarva Peninsula and power over 718,000 homes. It's important to note that for this project, it will be developed, at least outlined in the construction operations plan, in a number of phases. And during that period, will support almost 2,680 jobs annually over 7 years. The lease area for this project is about 8.7 nautical miles offshore of Maryland and approximately 9 nautical miles from Sussex County at its closest point to shore. So I'll also note that in the record decision, the lease area, there will be a total of 114 wind turbine generators that will be able to be installed per the guidance we received from U.S. Coast Guard about the navigational challenges on the eastern end of the lease. So with that, the last thing on the Maryland Wind Project, the Army Corps of Engineers will be making its permit decisions in coordination with the state of Delaware in January, and that will conclude some of the formal permit components of the project. And that follows after the decision by BOEM on the construction operations plan, which is scheduled in December. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Alex, to go through the BOEM studies. The first one is.
Hi, everyone. As Kirby mentioned, my name is Alex Schneider, and I'm a biologist with BOEM. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today about some BOEM-funded studies. I'm going to keep this pretty brief into fisheries in the Atlantic. And on our first slide here, I just have some recently completed studies who recently put out papers that are available online. All of those papers are linked here. So if you get the slides after this meeting, they're easily accessible, embedded into these different points. The first one is a white paper on EMF, electromagnetic fields, background and potential impacts of offshore wind farm on marine organisms. This is a literature review and synthesis that covers a variety of different species, inclusive of invertebrates, finfish, and elasmobranchs. The second and third study are all scientific papers that were recently published. The second being using advanced population genomics to better understand the relationship between offshore and spawning habitat use for Atlantic sturgeon. And the third is on impulsive pile driving sound does not induce hearing loss in the long-finned squid. I also have our studies development plan embedded here. That is for the upcoming fiscal year. The BOEM studies development plan highlights information needs and research priorities that BOEM has laid out, and that does become the foundation of funded studies moving forward. So if you're interested in what's on the horizon for BOEM studies, I highly recommend checking out that plan as well. Could go next. I won't go through and read all of these titles for you, but on this slide here, we have studies that were funded in previous cycles, but that are ongoing. They cover a variety of different fisheries species, from summer flounder, black sea bass, sturgeon, and a variety of different fisheries topics, from population dynamics to fisheries surveys and interactions with offshore wind. And all of these studies will have final reports that will be available on BOEM's website in the near future, either at the end of this year or the end of the following year. So if any of those titles pique your interest, definitely keep an eye on the BOEM studies page, and that's where they'll be found. If you could go next. Lastly here, I just have some of the upcoming studies that were recently finalized or are in procurement. These two listed do pertain to the Gulf of Maine. One is an interagency agreement with USGS to look at some baseline data for the Gulf of Maine. And then the second is looking at fisheries ecological knowledge for that same region. But I also wanted to point out that fall and moving into early winter, so really now is the time that BOEM starts thinking about the environmental studies plan for the next fiscal year. So trying to think about research priorities moving forward. And I welcome anyone who has ideas about research priorities to reach out to me during this meeting or moving forward. BOEM remains very excited to continue to fund really important and very cool fisheries related research. And we appreciate all of those who have contributed to our studies so far. And that's all. We're happy to take any questions if anyone has any. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirby and Alex. What I'd like to do, I should have mentioned this before we started. We have a handful of presentations over the next hour. And at some point when we finalize that, I think that would be a good opportunity to kind of have the council discuss as a panel with the presenters, if you guys can stick around for a little bit. But for any clarifying questions right now, if there's something in the presentation that you just want to ask a question regarding some clarity, now would be the time for that, and then we'll hold off on comments until after all the presentations are done. All right. I don't see anybody in the room. Yeah. Greg. Greg, you have to turn on your mic.
Thank you. Just real quick, you mentioned something about the cable that was going to run through Seagirt, the one there. Can you explain that to me a little bit further there? Thank you.
Yeah. So for Atlantic Shores, P3, 1 and 2, the point of interconnection, I believe, will go through it will go through Seagirt, but I'm not exactly sure the exact substation it connects into.
So you don't know if it's inland or on the beach or where the location of that is?
I'd have to double check on the exact location, but I'll get back to you on that.
And where does the other part of that go to? There's two connections, you said.
So the second one, I believe, was Atlantic City.
And where is that going to be connected to?
Again, I can follow up with you on the exact point, at least based on the construction operations plan that's been laid out.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else from around the table? Okay. I'm going to hold off on public engagement at this point too, but there will be an opportunity for the public to provide comments or ask questions once we get wrapped up here in a bit. Okay, Kirby, Alex, thank you. We're going to move on to the next presenter. Avalon Bristow.
Hi, thank you. I'm Avalon Bristow. I'm Executive Director here at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean. Really appreciate the opportunity from the council today to be here and present some updates. I'm going to start by providing just a general overview of what MARCO is, in case folks aren't familiar. Then I'm going to give some updates regarding the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal. And then I will also talk a little bit about a workshop that we held earlier this year around offshore wind transmission. Next slide, please. Okay. For those of you that may not be familiar with MARCO, we are a 5-state regional ocean partnership, or ROP. There are 4 such partnerships across the United States. And in 2022, Congress formally authorized ROPs to serve as intergovernmental coordinators on shared regional priorities related to the ocean. Our work focuses on bringing together state, federal, tribal, and regional entities, including the Council, the Fishery Management Council, to address issues that transcend individual state boundaries. I think most of you are familiar with that, but I do think it's important to mention that MARCO does not carry any regulatory authority. We are simply providers of information and conveners of regional discussion related to ocean planning. Next slide, please. We have 4 regional priorities which were established in 2009 via governor's agreement of all 5 governors of the 5 mid-Atlantic coastal states. Those priorities include protecting important and sensitive offshore habitats, supporting the sustainable and responsible development of offshore renewable energy, preparing coastal communities for the impacts of climate change, and promoting improvements to coastal water quality. We work to address these, like I said, at the regional scale. Next slide, please. One of the most significant ways that we do this, and a major body of work for MARCO in our portfolio, is the operation and maintenance of the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal. I imagine many of you are familiar with that. The portal is a mechanism for information and data sharing. It's completely free and open to the public, and it gives users access to a wealth of information about ocean use. Since its launch about over a decade ago, the portal has become a tool for decision makers, the public, and other stakeholders to visualize ocean data. It's really easy to use. It's really beautifully laid out. I encourage everybody to take a look at it if you haven't already. This slide is actually a little bit outdated. As of today, the portal houses 14 different themes and over 6,000 different data layers. It's managed by a technical team of contractors that build and maintain relationships with data providers and stakeholders to ensure that we present the most up-to-date information possible for users. I'll note there's been some discussion around the table today about sort of inter-regional coordination, and I will note that we work really closely with our New England counterpart, the Northeast Regional Ocean Council. They have a data portal that's very similar in nature, and we often collaborate on projects with one another, including co-hosting the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for Offshore Wind, which is a very similar entity to ROSA, if y'all are familiar. One update I wanted to share with this group is that over the past few years, we've worked with RODA to ensure that the fisheries information we provide is accurate and useful for all stakeholders. As a result, we recently added the GARFO Northeast Fishing Footprints data to the portal, thanks to a year-long collaboration with NOAA Fisheries. This update was directly informed by feedback we received from RODA and many sector-specific interviews that they worked with us to conduct. There are a few other improvements underway that resulted from this collaboration with RODA that that represent bigger efforts, longer efforts, and that includes a reorganization of fishing data. And so we're happy to provide updates. We envision that more progress will be made over the next couple of months on those things. So we're happy to speak with you again once we have those. We are also excited to be working directly with Council and Commission staff to host a draft rule changes such as the summer flounder mesh exemption action on the portal. And this is so fishermen can see proposed changes in the context with other layers on the portal. Like I mentioned, there's 6,000 of them, including shipping activity, fishing data, like I mentioned just now, the fishing footprint data, VMS, VTR, and more. Next slide, please. The other major prong or facet of our work is hosting the Ocean Planning Committee. Some of you in the room may have participated in the regional planning body a number of years ago. The Mid-AOPC is similar in concept and purpose. It's led by a steering committee of states, federal agencies, including BOEM, NOAA, the U.S. Army Corps, and tribes. Currently, the Shinnecock Indian Nation is a co-chair of the Mid-AOPC, and there is a seat for the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council as well, and we thank the staff that have been active in the Mid-AOPC for many years. The committee organizes forums for communication and information sharing. It fosters partnerships with regional organizations. This is a lot of the ways that we are able to efficiently get data onto the portal is directly from the partnerships and conversations that we have at the Mid-AOPC. We also engage stakeholders and via a public forum that we have annually, and it rotates by state. Next slide, please. Okay, one example of the kind of thing that the Mid-AOPC does is this offshore wind transmission workshop. We held this earlier this year to help build an understanding for Mid-AOPC members on ongoing activities and plans related to transmission of offshore wind energy, including the BOEM and DOE Atlantic Transmission Action Plan. We wanted to understand collectively what actions are already being implemented and to share ideas and discussions about what else might be needed. And this is in an effort to reduce duplication of efforts and make sure that we're collectively approaching things in the most efficient way possible. This is the kind of thing that the Mid-AOPC does from time to time. We convene members for regional discussion and information sharing around issues that are important to the region. This particular workshop focused on identifying challenges, opportunities, and information needs related to coordinating offshore wind energy transmission in the Atlantic. We heard from participants that there are data and data product needs for clarification of regulatory processes, and early coordination across agencies and stakeholders. We did include the full workshop summary as part of the meeting materials, so you all do have access to that, and I'm happy to answer questions if you read through it and have any. But I wanted to mention that one of the outcomes stated was suitability mapping, and so our colleagues at BOEM just talked about that a little bit, and Marco is coordinating really closely with BOEM and NCOS on their suitability mapping processes for the Central Atlantic. Folks also validated the need for fishing data updates on the portal that we've been working toward for some time, and have already implemented some and are already in the process of implementing others, as I mentioned before. Marco is continuing ongoing discussions on how and if we will move forward on any of the other articulated outcomes within that workshop summary, and as appropriate for our collaboration. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. So as mentioned, we've been coordinating and collaborating closely with the council, with the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council for a number of years. And we look forward to continuing the partnership, and we thank those that have been involved. I encourage you to take a look at the portal. I welcome suggestions on any data additions or improvements. We do recognize that there are a number of improvements that we could make to some of the data themes, and we would like to coordinate with all of you here to do that. There's contact information for myself. Jay Odell, who might be a familiar face to many of you, works very closely with Marco, and then Carl Villikova is our data portal manager, so feel free to reach out to any or all of us. Thank you.
Avalon, thank you very much, and thanks for introducing the guy to your right. Yeah, we know Jay. He's a fixture around here with our group, but Jay, thanks for being here as well. Did you have anything you wanted to add before I look for questions?
No, I'm just here for color commentary if the opportunity arises, or seriously to answer any questions that might come up.
I was thinking
that Avalon might, technical stuff, you know.
Okay, yeah, that's totally fine. I figured you were just like an arm candy kind of thing. I don't know. Okay, so let me see. Does anyone have any questions for Avalon? We'll keep it focused to this one particular presentation. Anyone in the room have any questions? Yes, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thanks, Avalon, for the great presentation. I was just curious, you mentioned some, I guess, forthcoming updates to some of the data layers within the portal, and I was curious to know if some of those might include speed filtered VMS data. So some of that is, I mean, that's one of the layers that I find particularly useful. And I think for some of the pretty important fisheries in our area, like surf clam and ocean quahog, I think it might only go through 2016 or something like that. And I was just curious to know if that might be one of those layers. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I might let my technical arm candy answer that.
Yeah, when we first started hosting VMS data, we didn't know any better, and we just threw it up, on there. And the speed filtering is a way to filter the data such that it better represents where people actually fish instead of transit zones. And so a lot of the data products on the portal now only do go to 2016. I think the fishing footprints goes to 2020. And so there's cycles of updates. They're ongoing. Over the next few months, there will be some updates of those data. That the communities that see data that cover a lot of the fisheries that aren't covered by VMS are also we're anxiously waiting work from some contractors on that. But yeah, the short answer is any data products that we put up there that are VMS will undergo some speed filtering. And there's some conversations that I haven't been fully part of with some specific industry groups and stakeholders about maybe taking a second look at some of the choices of, what the speed should actually be. And we're super open to advice on that front.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, it's good to see all the work. And so if you can you answer me, when did this portal start? Chris and I were just trying to figure out when this, because it's been a while now.
Yeah, 2012.
Okay.
And it started as a Virginia-based product that then expanded regionally. So
Yeah, it's Chris and I both were just starting with the council then, and around that time, I think, right? Yeah, 20. And so it's good to see that it's come a long way. I mean, it really has.
Thank you.
And congrats on that. All right, we'll hold off. If you guys can stick around, we'll come back for the panel discussion. I'm going to go next to Heather Gianovich with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
As you pronounced quite correctly, my name is Heather Gianovich from New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, where I work in the Division of Science and Research. I'm part of the team that implements New Jersey's Offshore Wind Research and Monitoring Initiative, or RMI. Thanks for including me on your schedule. I'm here to tell you about the RMI and invite your input on how we can plan studies that provide information that's needed to continue to manage marine fisheries as offshore wind is developed off our coast. We have a unique opportunity here to plan a suite of projects on a large geographic and timescale. And I'm just one member of the NJRMI. We asked for time at this meeting to share with you our research priorities, some of the research that has been launched, and to get your input on identifying research needs that support fishery management. Much like this council, we're in the process of updating the state's offshore wind strategic plan and our list of short-term highest priority research needs. And this really does align nicely with the draft updates to the council's strategic plan and the 5-year research priorities. I'd like to thank Michelle Duvall for recommending that we speak and Julia Beatty for putting us on the agenda. Next slide, please. Sorry, just one second here. All right, I'll start out with a look at the continental shelf off New Jersey and the development that we're anticipating over the next 10 to 15 years. In each of these colored polygons, we can expect full build out of turbines and substations with less than a nautical mile spacing. The projects will be connected to land by submarine transmission cables. As BOEM continues to hold auctions for lease areas in the Central Atlantic and considers a second look at the New York Bight area, this will present challenges for our fisheries that are losing access to fishing grounds and transit areas, not just for the fishing vessels, but also for fishery independent survey vessels. Providing information for offshore wind decision-making was the impetus for creating the NJRMI. Next, please. The goal of our research and monitoring initiative is to identify research needs, develop those topics into a scientific approach, and fund research so that we can continue to manage our marine resources as offshore wind is developed. RMI is a collaboration between the state's Board of Public Utilities and the Department of Environmental Protection. Funding was provided by the state's second and third offshore wind solicitations, which required projects to commit $10,000 per megawatt capacity to the state of New Jersey to exclusively fund research and monitoring. Together, solicitations 2 and 3 provided approximately $65 million in funding for the RMI. And at this time, we have awarded about half of our offshore wind target with the total goal of 11 gigawatts, and our current awards are totaling just over 5 gigawatts. Next, please. At this point, we are updating our research priorities. For some background, the RMI priorities were initially established in 2021, and they were built based on the resources in the project areas, their vulnerability to offshore wind effects, the likelihood and potential severity of those effects, and some practical considerations like, do we know how to answer that question? We worked with stakeholders and leveraged the expertise of subject matter experts from other states, regional entities, academics, federal partners like NOAA Fisheries, and so on. Since that time, RMI and the entire offshore wind community have really become more savvy about research needs and how to manage data on a regional scale. So as a result, we are updating our priorities. And in this update, we recognized a need to define coordination and data governance as priorities. We've also included technological innovation, along with the research and development of approaches to mitigation. And we've added a habitats and ecosystem category that includes oceanographic and atmospheric changes, habitat impacts, and ecosystem scale changes, which I'll go a little deeper on in the next slide. We're looking towards a future with an abundance of data for understanding our marine resources. This really is a renaissance in studying the ocean, and we are looking to detect environmental change in the context of offshore wind development. But we are conscious of, not just striving to collect all the data possible, but to make sure that we understand what we need to know for detecting change and mitigating impacts. Our priorities have to adapt as we learn more, and they're currently being stakeholdered. We anticipate finalizing the updates sometime in the second quarter of 2025. Next, please. So diving a little deeper into the habitat and ecosystem priorities, we've added a topic for oceanographic and atmospheric change with an identified need to examine potential effects of offshore wind development on meteorological and oceanographic conditions. And those include physical, chemical, and other processes and features, with some examples including light and sound conditions, hydrodynamics, water column stratification, and wind wake effects. For habitat impacts, there is a need to evaluate the effects of offshore wind and oceanographic processes on sensitive coastal and marine habitats, such as artificial reefs, prime fishing areas, surf clam beds, submerged aquatic vegetation, and estuaries. We also want to test nature-based designs such as green infrastructure that increases biodiversity and/or provides measurable benefits for the ecosystem. And under ecosystem change, we've added a priority to examine offshore wind effects at the ecosystem or landscape scale. And these would include the connection between oceanographic and atmospheric processes with habitats and wildlife, along with examining the spatial and temporal dynamics and biological productivity, such as zooplankton distribution and primary productivity, as well as trophic interactions, biomass changes, or measures of resilience and/or recovery. So we select research projects to fulfill the priorities that the RMI has identified. Some of our projects are already ongoing in these areas. The first one here on the right with this green icon is an eco-glider study, which is a 2-year oceanographic survey from Rutgers University and their Center for Ocean Observing Leadership, or Are You Cool? Josh Kohut and Grace Sava designed and deployed slocum gliders to collect critical oceanographic and ecological information pre-construction. 4 times a year, paired gliders crisscross the continental shelf, collecting oceanographic and biological data, and in between there are 3 single glider missions. Some of the more interesting results so far have included identification of a hypoxic event in the summer of 2023, and also lots of real-time North Atlantic right whale detections that NOAA uses to implement slow zones. For the second icon here, turbine foundations and cool pool, this is a study from Travis Miles at Rutgers, who is utilizing data from those eco-gliders to model the potential impact that turbine foundations may have on water column mixing and the seasonal formation and breakdown of the cold pool. And the last study featured here is also from Josh Kohut at Rutgers. This one investigates how offshore wind structures might be used as long-term monitoring platforms. Next slide, please. So here are two more of our research priorities that we are very much interested in your perspective on. For fishes and invertebrates, we see the need to synthesize existing information and assess the potential effects of offshore wind on the distribution, connectivity, behavior, health, reproduction, or other vital metrics for the fish and invertebrate communities and species of concern. We need to evaluate potential drivers of movement, behavior, and changes in fitness. And then for fisheries, we are interested in the development, implementation, or assessment of methods for evaluating and addressing impacts of offshore wind on commercial and recreational fisheries, including changes in socioeconomic, sustainability, access, and cumulative impacts. The RMI places great importance on employing New Jersey fishermen, vessels, and captains whenever possible. So for these, we would really like to hear from you regarding whether these are well framed and where you would suggest making additions. We'd also like, your perspective on any research topics that are currently understudied. So there are 5 projects featured on this slide. The top 2 icons are both out of Monmouth University. In the fish community eDNA study, Jason Adolph, Keith Dutton, and Shannon O'Leary are collecting and analyzing samples alongside the ocean trawl and 2 other New Jersey surveys to inform how this technique might be useful in replacing data that will be lost when federal surveys can't operate inside a wind farm. They're also engaging the public in the work and collecting data for establishing pre-construction fish community composition. Another project out of Monmouth is Keith and Jason working on an acoustic fish telemetry study where they've deployed an array of acoustic receivers across the shelf. They're also doing a lot of tagging on fish species of interest. And for socioeconomics of recreational fisheries, we have an economist out of Montclair University, Pankaj Lal, who is working on a survey-based project to examine these impacts. And then last but not least, Daphne Monroe from Rutgers University's Haskin Shellfish Research Lab is wrapping up one project for us that involved designing a novel surf clam dredge that can work more nimbly amongst the turbines in order to continue survey efforts for management. That project is also examining shell strength in relation to ocean acidification. Daphne also has a newly approved project for surf clam enhancement where her team is examining optimal surf clam planting density as well as predator preferences in order to maximize seed planting efforts. Next slide, please. As part of our stakeholder process for these research priorities, we developed a survey to collect feedback. You can access it with the QR code here, or I believe the link was shared in the pre-meeting materials. We're especially looking for your feedback on the fish and fisheries priorities, but we'd be happy for input on any of the topics that I've covered. Please consider helping us determine where we may have missed important areas of research or where we can refine our priorities to have the greatest impact. And as far as the survey, partial responses will definitely be accepted. So we encourage you to help guide our research focus. Next slide, please. And my contact information is here, along with my colleagues, Caitlin McGarrigle and Colleen Brust, who are also on the call. We work very closely together to advance this work forward, and we appreciate the time to share our priorities with you and to align them with what the council is doing. Thank you.
Heather, thank you very much for your presentation. Let me look to the members of the council to see if anyone has any questions. Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you so much, Heather, for the great presentation. Just one quick question, I guess, for you and Colleen. How long will the survey on the program's research priorities be open?
We're not closing it soon. I would say at least another month, possibly 2. We do plan to finalize the priorities later in the second quarter next year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. Just a follow-up on that question from Michelle. Are the survey results available real time, or do we have to wait until you close it and then analyze the data? Thank you.
We are able to draw the results real time, but we don't have them posted anywhere.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none around the table at this time. Heather, thank you. We may come back to you shortly, but we have one more presentation to get through before we can open up the discussion to members of the council and the public. So the next, let's see what my notes have here. Lisa Metherata will provide updates from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and Doug Crystal will be providing updates from Garfo's perspectives. And I don't know who's planning to go first, Doug or Lisa.
Hi, this is Lisa Mathrada. I think I'm slated to go first. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, and good afternoon to you and everyone who is listening. I'd like to begin by expressing my thanks for the opportunity to be here to speak with you today and provide some updates from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center related to offshore wind. I'd also like to acknowledge all of my colleagues on this slide who have contributed to the work that I'll be talking about today. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking about some work we're doing to develop project level monitoring standards for offshore wind. When I'm talking about project level monitoring, I'm talking about that monitoring conducted by developers as part of their site characterization. This monitoring is aimed typically at understanding biological, oceanographic, and benthic habitat change due to wind development. There are not really any requirements for how or what to monitor, although there are some existing guidelines that are available from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, most recently updated in 2023, and also from the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance that were put out in 2021 related to fishery species monitoring. At the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, we're currently developing regional standards for project level monitoring related to fishery species, protected species, socioeconomics, and benthic habitat, which the Greater Atlantic Office is taking the lead on. What we're developing here differs from previous guidelines in that they will be more question oriented around specific impact producing factors. They'll be more prescriptive, and they will address multiple dimensions of offshore wind impacts as outlined in the bullets at the bottom of this slide. The final product of this effort will be a document that we can provide to developers as they put together their monitoring plans, and we hope to have it by the end of the year. Next slide, please. So why is NOAA Fisheries developing standards for project level monitoring? The impetus for this work comes from the NOAA Fisheries and BOEM Federal Survey Mitigation Strategy Northeast for the Northeast U.S. region, which came out in 2022. There's a link to that document on this slide. An objective in this strategy, Objective 2.1, was to develop and apply regional standards and requirements to wind energy development, project-specific monitoring, and data accessibility. So both of these agencies have agreed that this objective is important to achieve, and this is why we're undertaking the effort to develop these standards. Next slide, please. So why does project level monitoring need to be standardized? Currently, project level monitoring is a patchwork of different project by project methods, sampling gear study designs, and other elements related to monitoring. If we could employ consistency in our methods and other elements of sampling when addressing a given question in an offshore wind development, this would enable the integration of data across projects and allow us to begin evaluating regional scale changes in populations. Next slide, please. There are numerous elements that need to be standardized excuse me, for project level monitoring, which I've listed here on this slide. I won't go through all of these individually, but there are numerous elements related to defining questions, elements of the sampling method, platform, and design, and how data are handled, stored, analyzed, and the interpretation of analysis after collection, and also the evaluation of the monitoring plan itself through performance indices, index evaluation, and then opportunities and scheduling for when to review and adapt the monitoring plan over time. Next slide, please. For the version 1.0 of this monitoring standards, we're aiming to address monitoring questions around impacts related to noise, EMFs, the movement of fish in and around wind energy areas, changes in hydrodynamics and artificial reef effects. These are the initial focus points of the monitoring standards. Next slide, please. And I also wanted to share some of the elements of the socioeconomic monitoring. This slide was provided to me by my colleague, Tarsila Sierra and Angela Silva at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, who are taking the lead on developing standards for monitoring elements of socioeconomic impacts, the methods and indicators that are needed to develop monitoring, both direct and indirect effects from these impact producing factors, which are shown in the orange bubbles on the left side of this diagram. And then trying to understand the responses to meaningful receptors, including revenue and costs, industry employment, landings, characteristics, and other changes related to socioeconomic impacts from wind development during each phase of offshore wind development. Next slide, please. I'd like to now pass the mic over to my colleague at the Greater Atlantic Regional Office, Doug Crystal, to continue on with the next slides for his updates.
Whenever you're ready, Doug. Doug, if you're trying to speak, we can't hear you. All right, take your time, Doug.
So Doug, you're unmuted on our side, and if you click the little caret near the mute button, it'll give you some options of mics to select. If that doesn't work, under that, you may want to choose on the caret. If you go to switch audio, you can disconnect your audio and reconnect. Also, under that switch audio, you can disconnect computer and follow the phone audio instructions.
Jason, thank you very much. I reconnected. Does this work?
Yeah, we got you.
Hello? Okay, great.
Yeah, we got
Thank
you,
you.
Doug.
I
Go ahead.
apologize. Thank you. My apologies for the technical issues. It was working during the break. Thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to give a couple of quick overviews from the GARFO perspective. As Lisa indicated, in addition to the standards that the Northeast Fisheries Science Center is working on, we are developing parallel standards relative to the benthic monitoring application. These standards will be focused on describing the habitat quantity and quality and are predominantly based upon the essential fish habitat conservation recommendations that we have been advocating for all the project reviews. So they will be very similarly formatted and integrated with the effort that the Northeast Fisheries Science Center is leading. As Kirby summarized earlier, we are also developing our comments on the Central Atlantic Round 2 call for information. We are coordinating with our colleagues in the Southeast Regional Office as well as the Southeast Fisheries Science Center to develop those comments and assemble the data layers that most effectively represents the distribution of fishing effort, fishery resources, habitats, protected species, and other information that would help inform BOEM's decision on suitability relative to the future wind energy areas and ultimately lease areas. Part of that includes getting updated BMS data such that we can inform the model for the most recent fishing activities that are within the call area identified by Kirby earlier today. Relative to the US or Maryland wind, we had offered conservation recommendations relative to the essential fish habitat to avoid the cable corridor through Indian River Bay, but that was not accepted in the project approval. And so we are trying to understand and appreciate how the habitat impacts will affect this project, as well as future recommendations for similar activities in other projects. For Sunrise Wind, there is a need to reinitiate the EFH consultation due to changes to a pier in the Long Island Intercoastal Waterway, which could impact submerged aquatic vegetation. And so that requires and triggers a reinitiation of the EFH consultation, which we are coordinating with the project developer and BOEM at this time. Kitty Hawk North has been sold to a Dominion Wind, and it is soon to be renamed Seavow South. That could potentially shift some of the milestones, but I defer to BOEM with any additional updates in that regard. And then finally, for Kitty Hawk South, there are ongoing discussions with our Southeast office regarding the cable corridor, and there may be some associated name changes given the conversion of Kitty Hawk North sale to Dominion Energy. Next slide, please. Finally, we wanted to give a very quick overview of some information on fish kills that have been observed near pile driving operations in 2 of the regional wind projects. The first one, there was a series of observations by protected species observers of 17,000 Atlantic croaker in the vicinity of pile driving activities. There were 38 observations between May and August, anywhere between 1 and 3,500 meters from the turbine foundations. We have been coordinating with BOEM and other entities to try to obtain some samples and facilitate necropsies on those dead fish to better understand potential causes of their mortality. We have 2 reports from the samples taken, one of which suggests some sound exposure as well as other injuries to the fish, and another report has similar physical injuries such as broken bones and other injuries that were associated with gas accumulation, at least in part. The take-home message from these necropsies is that more study is needed to determine causation, but there are potential relations to various activities associated with pre-installation or installation of the foundations. For Revolution Wind, there were a couple of dead hake observed near the pile driving activities and 3 incidents during July, but we did not do necropsies for those samples taken. So with that, I will leave it there. If there is any questions, we can address those as necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I'm sure we're going to have questions, especially if you leave up this last slide for the remainder of the discussion. But let me see if anyone has questions, either for Doug or for Lisa at this point, and then we'll open things up for discussion. Anna Beckwith.
Yes, thank you. Just some clarifying questions. In slide 39, under addressing monitoring priorities, one, because I'm not particularly informed on wind as I'm new, what does EMF mean? And also, I hear a lot of concerns about lubricants and other pollutants that come off of these turbines and such and end up in the water. And I'm wondering where that would be found and if that would be considered a monitoring priority. And then I have one more question after that.
Hi, this is Lisa. I can start with some answers to your questions, and by starting with saying thank you for your questions. Apologies for using an acronym here without defining it. EMFs refer to electromagnetic fields. Those are fields emitted by the cables that are within the array, and the cables that go from the array to land and connect to the the power grid on land. So the EMF stands for electromagnetic fields. And then your other question was related to lubricants and pollutants. This is a topic of interest. It is part of, you'll see in the first bullet, which I didn't really talk much about. We have another document. We're developing a draft Northeast U.S. Regional Science Plan. Issues around pollutants are included in the science plan. This is an important topic. It's in our list of priorities, but for the first round of developing standard methods for monitoring standards for offshore wind, we're focusing on these first 5 topics for now, and would look toward adding additional topics, including the one that you mentioned in the future.
Go ahead, Anna.
And I had one more question on slide 41. When you guys discuss the avoidance of Indian River Bay was not accepted, I'm just curious. So I guess it's mostly suggestions that's not binding, and they can just sort of shake us off like a wet dog.
Mike Penny.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, the under the Magnuson Act, when we do an EFH, Essential Fish Habitat consultation, we're providing recommendations to the action agencies, and they're non-binding recommendations. Agencies are required to respond to us within 30 days and provide a rationale for any of our conservation recommendations that they are not adopting. But nonetheless, they're non-binding recommendations. So in this particular case, we made a point to stress the importance of Indian River Bay and the habitats associated with that, and suggested alternatives that would require crossing land. But BOEM ultimately did not adopt that approach.
Michelle.
Thank you. Are we in sort of the bigger question, or is this just period, or is this just questions specific to this presentation?
Let me ask if there are any other questions specific to this presentation that was just given before we go into the general discussion. Joe.
Since we're on this one, back on the kill slide, you mentioned have to look at studies to see why this may have happened. How long are these studies going to take, considering that where this occurred, that project will be finishing the pile driving operations by next year? So we even going to have an answer to this before they even are done, the damage is done, and we have a fish loss with no explanation.
Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. We at this point, we have taken limited samples from the species that were observed, and we are coordinating with BOEM and other entities to understand what has happened. The preliminary reports from the samples taken are mixed causation, and it's not really clear whether and what activities contributed to the injuries received. The necropsies to date do suggest there are multiple potential causes for the injuries observed, and we will hopefully get more information, perhaps with additional samples if that's possible. Also, some of the studies that BOEM and others have indicated will help us understand some of the effects of sound and other activities on these species. So we'll have a more robust understanding of the potential impacts on a species-specific level so that we can potentially develop more mitigation measures as necessary. But that is something that we are trying to collect more information on as part of our essential fish habitat conservation recommendations for projects going forward. And we're hoping that collectively that information can inform future decisions. But because the requirement to record and observe or record observations of dead fish as part of the construction and operations plan approval, I will defer to BOEM to address what, if any, additional steps would be taken for addressing future events.
Yeah, I can just
Alex, go ahead.
add to that a little bit. As BOEM, we've been working very closely with Dominion and a variety of state experts and experts on fish taxonomy and fish health, both at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science and NC State, digging into some of the data that we do have that Dominion was able to provide us, as well as looking into the data that's collected on the hydrophones that are spread out throughout the CVOW project. So we're being really proactive to try to figure out what might be causing these events, but we don't have any conclusive results at this time. But we have multiple meetings on the docket to try to get answers for this problem.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So I see a bunch of hands going up at this time. We have 15 minutes left on the agenda. At least that's when the Phillies game starts at 4. But so let's do this. Let's open up the floor for comment questions related to the presentations for all panelists. That way everyone has an opportunity to ask and cross-reference the different presenters today. And I have Michelle up first, then I'm going to go to Dan Farnham, Joe Cimino, and I'll come back to the left side of my table here. I saw a few other hands. I don't remember which one of you guys raised it, but if it was Skip and Joe. All right, so we'll start with Michelle. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I have 2 questions. One is for Dr. Mithrada, and it just with respect to the standards for the regional standards for project level monitoring. And I was curious to know, have any conversations occurred with other entities, I think specifically BOEM and perhaps ROSA, about, these regional standards and perhaps coordinating on that. Obviously, BOEM does have some fisheries monitoring guidance that is, was updated last year. And so, question is, plans for perhaps, coordinating or communicating with other bodies on that. And then I'll just go ahead and put my second question out there. And this is for BOEM staff. Just not to beat a dead horse, but when could we expect finalization of the fisheries mitigation guidance that has been in draft for a long time? Thank you.
Hi, this is Lisa Mathrada again. Thank you for the question. In terms of coordinating, so this effort is part of the NOAA Fisheries and BOEM federal survey mitigation strategy. So this is an objective that both agencies have agreed that needs to be achieved. Once we have the standards developed, we do plan to share them with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and have discussions with them on these. And we have been shared awareness of this work with the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance as well. Was there an additional question that you had for me?
No, that was it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that response, Lisa.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you all. Alex, did you have a follow-up to that second part?
Yes, thank you. We're expecting by the end of the calendar year.
I'm going to hold you to that. If we don't see it by the December council meeting, we're coming back. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dan Farnham, you're up next.
Yep, thanks, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, I'll be brief here. There's a game here we want to watch in New York today, too. I have a question for Doug Crystal. Can we go back to that last slide in the presentation, please? So that picture on the left, is that an actual photograph taken during pile driving activities in July?
Hi, Dan. Yes, that was a picture that was taken by one of the fishery or protected species observers that were on board to monitor operating conditions for pile driving again, we are receiving these reports, but they are a condition of the project approval.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me it's a lot more than 31 dead fish there. Do you know what kind of hake they were? If they were red hake or silver hake by any chance?
So this is just a picture from the CVOW operations, and they are almost exclusively Atlantic croaker. The couple of pictures that I saw from the Revolution Wind, they were red hake and white hake, but there were possibly sea robins also mixed in with that from the one or two images. They weren't the best quality, so we tried our best to identify them, but generally they were a hake species.
Yep. Okay. Very good. Very good. Thank you. That's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next, I have Joe Cimino.
Yep. Yeah. Same stuff here. So, I mean, obviously the protected species observers have an important job. And so I guess my question to BOEM is there a mechanism now that this, now that we're kind of tuned into this may be a concern that there's some other way other than, just the protected species observers covering this? Is there something within, as Doug mentioned, this becomes a requirement of the COP to report, but it becomes part of the FMPs that during pile driving, there will be some other way to monitor and observe this, just for this particular instance to make sure that we're getting better information on this.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. Yeah, so as part of the conditions for the project, CVOW does have to report observations of dead fish seen during the observation period, and there are a lot of eyes on the water during this time. We have 3 protected species observers and observers on the vessel that's doing the construction itself, as well as 2 support vessels that are stationed about 3 kilometers away from the foundation. And that's a requirement across the board for these projects. And as these events are occurring, we're being very conscious and thinking about how we can monitor them and prevent them from happening moving forward.
Skip.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just basically have a statement. I was going to say unfortunately, but it's probably fortunately. We observed this on 2 or 3 of our trips with boatload of Dominion's people. We run them several trips a week of them out there to see the turbines, and we saw this 2 or 3 times. So, if I, of course, hindsight's 20/20. I could have gotten them all the samples they wanted. We will be ready next early summer. If it happens again, we'll have all you want.
Yeah, thanks for that. I have one comment that I'd like to make, and then we can go to the public for some comment. But in thinking about the discussion, even just today, and this isn't the first time this council's had a group of folks come in and talk about wind development, and it's great to have BOEM here. And I guess it's a hard question. I don't necessarily expect an answer, but I think it's something that BOEM should be thinking about at the higher levels in the advancement of this work in the ocean. It's clear to me there are a ton of people that they want to learn more about what impacts this type of development can have on the animals that live in the ocean. And there's all sorts of groups coming together to try to feed the information system. We're doing science, there's monitoring occurring, there's all of these people that are interested, and then you have your industry representatives who are scared and nervous and worried about the impacts because not all the science is done. The science is still ongoing. It's still happening as we're in the stages of development. And then something which I think this is going to have a bigger impact than maybe some folks would think. We have we have an example now. You can't blame it solely on the pile driving, but it's a pretty tight connection to pile driving to dead croaker and dead other species. And I guess my question, if I had to try to ask you, Kirby or Alex, or just Boehm generally a question, where along the line, if the ball's rolling down the hill and you've got this timeline that's for 3 years from now, and where along the line is there any place for some pausing, some as information becomes more and more and more available? Is there enough that will we ever get to the point where there's enough information that's just like, maybe this type of activity in this particular area is not conducive to those organisms and animals and that live here? I mean, I don't know if you guys are having discussions like that, but when you see things and you see the mortality associated with these events, and it just begs the question as to, what's the next step? What do you do next once you know that one leads to the other?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm not in a position to say what higher ups at Boehm think on the matter per se. But what I do know is that, as you mentioned, we are actively trying to study and investigate any of these instances around these projects to help us better address them preventatively, as well as to consider them as, in that preventative mindset with other projects in terms of their terms and conditions. So I think at a minimum, we can always plan to be available to answer questions that this council and other councils have, and be contacted, and are, welcome the opportunity to come back and continue to provide you all more information as we learn more information on this. So I think that's, at this stage, that's what I could offer up.
All right, appreciate that, Kirby. Thank you. Anyone else from the council before I go to the public? Joe Grist.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just Boehm asked for research ideas, things to be looking into. One topic hadn't actually come up here yet, but it's a good case study. I think it's timely, is environmental impact of the Vineyard Wind structure failure and what impacts that had to public health and safety, both along the coastline and in the maritime industry. Not just the fishing industry, it affected others too, because there's debris in the water that can damage boats, could damage shipping. And then of course you had the issues on the beaches and all the debris washed up on there. And that was one fairly brand new structure. It'd be great to get a case study on what went wrong there, to know what we may be expecting in the future for the rest of our coast.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Peter Hughes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I had my hand up online. I asked this question last week. The state of New Jersey had a meeting last Tuesday. We're seeing the squid harvest this year is not following its normal trajectory that it has in previous years, and it could be a one-off, but there's very, very low catch and very, very low catch per unit of effort right now. At what point do we say, we look at these dead croakers here on the screen, and the necropsy report suggests injury due to sound exposure. At what point do we what's the matrix we use? What's the metric we use to say that, if in 2 years from now, squid harvests are still down, is it because of the noise that's being generated in the ocean that was not there in previous years? And not just say that it's due to climate change. It has nothing to do with noise. When over in Europe, there's a lot of studies that say noise in the ocean interferes with squid, and they don't go to their normal normal areas where they would congregate because of that noise. So the squid catches are down. I just want to know what's a metric going to be that Boehm looks at, or I don't know if it's up to individual developers to look at, that say, squid fishery is down now, and that trend is 3 years in a row. At what point do we say, you know, this isn't climate change. This is all the noise that's being generated out in the ocean. So I think it's a fair question to ask, along with those croakers, that Skip would be happy to get you plenty of photos of.
Yeah, it's certainly a fair question, Peter. I don't know there's a great answer for it right now, but that's a good question. Alex, did you have something you wanted to offer?
Yeah, I was just going to add that one of the studies that we shared on our slides is a new study on the impact of sound on squid. So if that's a concern, I encourage you to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Bobby Rule.
Thank you. One of the things I'm curious about is I have tons of questions of how to deal with wind going forward, but when you look at the graph of the potential build out in the next decade or so, the amount of area, and you look at the footprint now of what's actually being done, we're at a very low percentage of actual construction, actual on the water work. And now we're having these issues arise. We're having, you know, fish kills from possible sound interference and all that. And I'm curious as to do we have a mechanism that we're kind of contemplating or a way to absorb this scientifically when there is an outside source besides the scope of what the council can manage, which is basically removals from fishery? When you have an outside entity that is creating a giant removal from a fishery that is beyond natural mortality, I mean, how do we account for that? Because right now, basically, we manage with F and M, and this is a removal, but it's not natural. It's not F. It's not directed fishery, and it's not M because it's not natural. So you have another classification for removal. But how do we, as managers, how do we deal with that? Especially when, if it kind of goes the road it's been going now, we're not going to have a say anyway. We're not going to have any control. We're just an advisory board that can fall on deaf ears. So I'm curious as to what kind of impacts that could have going forward. And when we're seeing fairly sizable impacts now from very minimal, interactions at, here at the kind of the starting gate of this. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. One I often think about. You know, the work we do, often we don't have as much control as we'd like in managing fisheries, and adding another element to it. I think John Hare said it earlier when you're talking about this is even beyond an ecosystem approach. This is ecosystem management when you take all the pieces and put it together. And I think we're quite a ways away from dealing with that, head on, but it's a great question. We're at the end of our time on the agenda. I do want to offer the public an opportunity to provide any comments that they have. So let me see. I've got one hand in the room. Anyone else in the room want to provide any comment? Is there anyone online? If you can raise your hand online, it'll just give me a sense as to how many people might want to offer comment. I don't know if it's not seeing hands. Let's see. That's weird. I'm not seeing any of the hands. It's okay though. I can.
You got one question in the audience back here, Mike.
Okay, let's take the question. Go ahead, Renee.
Renee Riley, Responsible Offshore Science Alliance. Lisa, I was wondering if you mentioned this and I missed it, if you could clarify when those standards are set to be published. So I know we talked about the draft mitigation guidance, but I didn't catch the standards for monitoring. Thank you.
Hi, Renee. Thanks for the question. We're looking to share the standards that we developed with BOEM by the end of the year. Publication of the standards, I believe, would come after that. So stay tuned for a more specific date to come out in the near future.
Okay, Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan Lapp-Seafries. I just want to briefly touch on an issue that's been discussed at this council before, but there are new folks around the table right now. The 2024 BOEM study that says squid are not deafened by pile driving is a complete farce, and it has real life implications for species managed by this council. The piling that they were driving in that study is about this big, and it was done off of a dock somewhere in New England. It's not a 30-foot wide monopile being driven into the ocean floor by a vessel larger than this building. Vessels which we regularly see up our way because they're active. So I guarantee if BOEM really wanted to do a study on that, they could take those squid in that cage and go out to one of the Revolution Wind or Vineyard Wind pilings, and they could see a very, very different result than what happened when they had a tiny baby piling that they drove off of a dock with a crane from land. Also, to the issue of the kill slide, BOEM can say that it needs more data, but I think everybody around this table knows what happens when you pile drive next to fish, especially with a swim bladder. When I lived down south, there was something called redneck fishing, where you take a firework and throw it into a body of water. And when that sound pressure explodes, fish float to the top just like that. And that's why it's illegal. And to Bobby's point, this is a serious source of mortality that NIMS is not accounting for, or not able to account for in our current management system. But I would request that NIMS begin to include this in its EFH and EIS comment letters, because I think it's an important issue for the agency to raise. And now we have observer data recording this. This isn't just anecdotal, this is observer data that's going into the agency. And I think it's very important to raise that with BOEM officially. And also, I just want to publicly thank Wes Townsend for his service to the fishing industry on the issue that made him not able to chair part of this meeting today. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Megan. I've got four people that I'm going to recognize for public comment, and then we're going to wrap things up. So right now, I have David, Bonnie, Julie, and Katie. So we'll start with you, David. David Fulla.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, David Frula, for the Fisheries Survival Fund, representing the Scallop Limited Access Fishery. I wanted to make a point, and I'm sorry I've been out for surgery, so I haven't been able to make this point as much as I'd like to in the BOEM meetings to date on the Central Atlantic Bight 2. But the revenue exposure that NIMS is showing for the scallop fishery for the Central Atlantic Bight is $1.5 billion coming out of the two access areas, Elephant Trunk and Delmarva. Overall, the state of Massachusetts is showing $500 million of impact. It's almost $800 million for New Jersey and $400 million for Virginia. So there's major impact that you're going to see with revenue exposure, particularly out of the access areas. And I want to make sure that that's considered by BOEM when they're designing their lease areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Bonnie Brady.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Super. I just wanted to ask of Mr. Crystal how the public could go about getting that observer data specifically so they could review it on their own. Is that require a FOIA, or is it just a request of National Marine Fisheries Service? What procedure would be necessary to do that?
Doug?
I think I may defer that to BOEM. This is, again, a condition in a project approval, but that report is being provided to BOEM, and we are receiving it indirectly as part of our monitoring elements. We're monitoring the situation, but we don't really have any authority to act upon these type of activities.
Right, then I'd have to re-ask that question of whoever the BOEM representative is. How do we go about accessing that observer report data? I know after the fact in IHAs, et cetera, you can see some public comments, but obviously if it's observer data, how does the public go about requesting and getting that?
Kirby or Alex, do you have any thoughts at this time on advice for Bonnie about how to acquire the information that's being collected?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that as Alex had indicated, we're continuing to complete these studies, try to make sense of these fish kills. Understanding that, I know Bonnie, what we can try to do is internally talk and figure out how best to give feedback to Bonnie on how to obtain more information on these fish kills. And, we're planning to make, these results public and present on them, but we don't have a timeline quite yet on that. So
May I just make a request when you do so, because I know for like the IHAs, they block out the observer specifically, so no personal information. But we'd really like to get actual copies of the necropsies in addition to whatever reports or information is done. And I will get your all email information so I can find out what's going on. Thank you very much.
all right, thanks.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks, Kirby. Julie Evans.
Hello. I am kind of, this is Julie Evans. I'm with the East Hampton Town Fisheries Advisory Committee. And I'm kind of floored by the information that was presented today. And I'd like to inform BOEM that if you don't want this information public, you shouldn't have made it public today, because it is now public and we all are understanding that pile driving causes fish kills. And this goes to trust in government. I mean, all this information we got today is like just very late. This should have all been done years ago before Block Island built the wind farm, or they didn't build it, but it's called the Block Island Wind Farm. But I mean, this is leads me to have little faith in government agencies. Why wasn't all this research done prior to putting up or giving leases for millions and millions of dollars to all these foreign national companies to build wind farms to supply electricity, which we don't even know if it's cost effective, really? I know this is more of a comment than a question, but if anybody has an answer, I'd certainly love to hear it.
Yeah, I don't know, Julie. I don't know anyone's going to have a great answer back to you, but you make some good points. We'll just take it as comment at this time. But thank you for participating. I want to wrap things up with Katie Almeida.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you. Katie Almeida from the Town Dock. I just wanted to make a quick comment on the squid study. I do want to say that I listened to the presentation when it was presented to the Mid-Atlantic Council, and I read it on my own. And in the report, it did say that pile driving did affect feeding and schooling, those behaviors of the squid. I also share Megan's concerns about the size of the pile drive, the piling they used in this experiment. And I also mentioned this during that presentation, but there's often a comparison used between these wind farms that are currently being built and Block Island Wind. And we need to stop making that comparison because these are two different farms. Block Island has smaller turbines, inshore, different area, different species, and there's 5 of them. And this is a whole different animal that we have being planned out here on the East Coast. So I just think that's important to keep in mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katie. I'm going to bring it back to the council for one last shot. Take it while you can get it. Jim?
Thanks, Chairman. And just a suggestion, and this goes back to, this is very similar to something we dealt with many years ago with power plants and entrainment and impingement, and which was some of us were involved with. And very similar things going on about we were taking large quantities of fish for power generation. They were being killed, whatever, and different things happened over that. So one thing I think BOEM can do is to look back at that and see some of the analogies about, how that was handled. And not to be pessimistic, but the reality is that the fishing industry, the government had to prove that not only was there mortality occurring, but it was having a population level effect on that, on the fishery population before they'd even talk about compensation. Some plants did end up doing compensation, but other ones did very little. So we really need to look at documenting, what our populations are, and then doing research that'll connect. We saw, as much as we've seen dead croaker, I'm telling you right now, that's not going to have a lot of impact on any kind of action. But if you have a population effect on croaker, then it might be an issue that would be later on. And again, not to be even more pessimistic, at the end of the day, the power companies just threw money at it. So they talked about building hatcheries or whatever to compensate what was lost. But the flip side from them, they're providing energy for the public, which is a very important thing. And even some of the companies said, well, why can't we have a part of the fishery quota to kill because we're generating electricity? So that's the kind of mindset you need to get into. And again, Boehm, if you look back at that, that might give you some insight as to maybe how to deal with what's coming. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jim. Okay, so for our presenters, Kirby, Alex, Avalon, Jay, Heather, Lisa, Doug, thank you all very much. We appreciate your time and energy spent here this afternoon. That's going to conclude our business under this item on the agenda. And I'm going to kick things back over to our chairman, Mr. Wes Towson, to take us through the rest of the afternoon. Wes.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for pinch hitting for me this afternoon. Let's move on to our final agenda item for the day, our habitat activities update. Karen Green will be from Garfro's Habitat and Ecosystem Service Division. I believe you have a presentation. And Karen, whenever you're ready.
Okay, yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here again. This is our kind of semi-annual update on the activities of the Habitat and Ecosystem Services Division. Doug already did our wind presentation, so I'm going to tell you about some of the other things that's been going on in our division in the last 6 months. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so this first slide is about our habitat restoration guidance that we just put out with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, our colleagues at NCOS, and with the Atlantic Coast Joint Venture. Our staff in HESD worked for the past year or so collaboratively with these folks to develop this guidance document that stresses holistic marsh restoration. We've been seeing a lot of projects in recent years that are focused solely on single species restoration, mostly restoring bird nesting habitat. And we've been working to increase the awareness of potential impacts to fish habitat when you do that, when you focus solely on one aspect. And we've also been focusing on the value of low marsh and submerged aquatic vegetation and other components of the habitat. This marks a step forward in encouraging projects to consider a range of project benefits. I'm sorry, I lost my place. I'm very sorry. And it really prevents the perception that it's fish versus birds. We see that a lot when we're showing, when we're reviewing projects like this. So we're hoping that this guidance, now that we've put it out, and if you scan that QR code, or if you reach out to me or Jessica or Julia, we can get you the web site location. It's posted on the Atlantic Coast Joint Ventures website. We're hoping that this guidance will get us better projects and get them through the design, permitting, and implementation faster. Next slide, please. Okay, so swinging from marsh restoration to infrastructure in the Mid-Atlantic. I think in our last presentation, we mentioned the collapse of the Key Bridge, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. Recently, the record of environmental consideration was completed for the emergency channel cleanup following the bridge collapse. The design build contractor has been selected, and a design charrette has been set for sometime this month with a focus on environmental impacts of the remaining demolition. They need to demolish some of the remaining piers that are still in the river, and the design of the new bridge. One of the concerns with this remaining work is the planned explosive demolition of the remaining bridge piers, especially during the migratory fish closure period this spring coming up. We are working closely right now with Federal Highways and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and other involved agencies to seek minimization and mitigation as plans are developed for the demolition and the new bridge. The intention right now is to have a new bridge up and running by October 2028. So that's a pretty ambitious schedule. There's a couple of other bridge projects that we're working on within the Chesapeake Bay region. The Maryland Transit Authority is continuing their Tier 2 NEPA process for a new Chesapeake Bay Bridge, which will be built near the current alignment. A notice of intent with proposed alternatives is set to be released this fall, and we are a cooperating agency on that. The Federal Rail Administration is also in the process of establishing a double track bridge along the northeastern corridor. This includes 2 bridges in a designated spawning habitat for the fish in the Chesapeake Bay, alewife and blueback herring and American shad. This Susquehanna Rail Bridge and Long Bridge are also part of what we're working on. We're working closely to avoid disturbances to spawning runs and have championed compensatory mitigation projects that benefit migratory fish. And finally, in the Chesapeake Bay as well, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is developing an environmental impact statement for a new shipping terminal in the Port of Baltimore. And this new terminal will likely include the construction of an offshore dredge material containment facility and the potential filling of between 40 to 100 acres of waters in the process. We're working to inform the development of that project, including a mitigation package. Next slide, please. Okay, moving up a little bit. In the Delaware River, we've got a couple of other ports that are in process, either under construction or in the process of being permitted. We've talked a little bit before about the New Jersey Wind Port, and phase 1 of that is under construction, but they still have not done the required compensatory mitigation for impacts to complex habitat through dredging. We're currently working with the Army Corps of Engineers and the permittee on that compensatory mitigation, which is proposed to include placement of structure materials, concrete pilings and such at the New Jersey Artificial Reef site within the Delaware River. So far, New Jersey has not placed material at that approved reef site, so this will be the first placement of material there. And we're hoping that it replicates some of the habitat functions that we lost through the dredging during the phase 1 construction. Phase 2 of that project is in the permitting process right now. And cumulatively between phase 1 and 2, about 156 acres of bay bottom will be dredged and 5 million cubic yards of dredge material will be beneficially reused. Current concerns with the phase 2 project include a beneficial use project that involves the placement of dredge material offshore of Mad Horse Creek Wildlife Management Area within the Delaware Bay. So it's an unconfined placement of material, and we haven't been convinced so far that the placement of that material will actually migrate to the marsh and be beneficial. So that's something we're working with the Army Corps on and the applicant now, is to maybe do a pilot study or seek an alternate location for that material. Other issues of concern with that is the driving of about 3,000 new concrete piles and substantial shoreline hardening. We have a number of other ports that are, as I mentioned, being developed or redeveloped within the Delaware watershed, and that includes the Port of Salem, Southport, and some pier rehabilitation at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Some of these ports are tied to offshore wind as well. Next slide, please. So last time we mentioned the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and their search for new borrow areas offshore of the Atlantic coast of New Jersey. And we're continuing to work with them on that. Recently, they initiated a consultation with us under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. So we did our EFH consultation with them and we issued conservation recommendations. And those recommendations were really tied to avoiding important fishing grounds, avoiding sand ridges and other valuable habitats. The Army Corps of Engineers right now is in the process of developing surveys that are in accordance with the guidance that we've provided BOEM for offshore habitat mapping, and they intend to go out in the near future to survey potential sites. And the image up there is some potential locations that they're looking at right now. Next slide. We've mentioned during our updates a number of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers coastal storm risk management studies, and there's been some progress on some, and there's some new ones that have come along. Typically, these kind of go in fits and starts as funding becomes available. So in the Philadelphia district, and you can find more information on these projects when you go to those links on the slide. So in the Philadelphia district, we have a new path forward for the New Jersey Back Bay study. Previously, the Army Corps of Engineers tentatively selected plan included storm surge barriers across Manasquan, Barnegat, and Great Egg Harbor inlets, and cross bay barriers in Ocean City and Atlantic City. The new tentatively selected plan for this study includes only actionable items such as raising building elevations, floodproofing, and nature-based feature projects that will focus on wetlands enhancement through sediment placement on marshes. They haven't identified any of the locations for those nature-based features, but all of the projects will be using material that's been dredged from channels within the area. And also potentially reclaimed from abandoned confined disposal facilities. With this plan, they will have a new draft report that's anticipated to come out in mid-November, and they anticipate the project will be incorporated into the Water Resources Development Act of 2026. Some of the other measures previously discussed, like those storm surge barriers and cross bay barriers, will be mentioned in that new report, but they will not be part of the tentatively selected plan. So they're not being contemplated for construction now, but they're not entirely off the table for the future. In the Delaware Inland Bays, Delaware Coastal Bays Storm Risk Management Study, and that's kind of a mouthful. That's another kind of familiar one. We're cooperating agency on that project, just like we are with all the other storm risk management projects. But not much has happened on this project, in the past year or so, until recently when the Army Corps reached out to us for scoping comments. They're currently updating the study schedule and plans, and the plan's alternatives will be developed by November 2024. So it's likely that some of these alternatives will include storm surge barriers. There are a number of other projects that are in various stages of development in Virginia, including the Norfolk Coastal Risk Management Study. And that one's pretty much the farthest one along from all the studies that are occurring in Virginia. Right now, they're working on final designs and construction is moving forward on protection measures in the phase 1 area of downtown Norfolk. Other measures that were in that plan, including a storm surge barrier across the Lafayette River, remain part of the plan, but they will be designed and there'll be more discussion about them at a later date. The Army Corps is currently also in the process of evaluating potential alternatives for the City of Virginia Beach's coastal storm management study, which includes beach nourishment along both the Atlantic and Chesapeake Bay shorelines, as well as flood walls, levees, storm gates at various locations within that region, including the Lynn Haven River, Little River, Fruity Inlet, and the Elizabeth River. The current schedule calls for a tentatively selected plan to be developed by July 2025, with a feasibility report out for public comment in September of 2025. There will likely be a request for scoping comments when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers issues a notice of intent to prepare the EIS sometime in May next year. So we'll probably let you guys know about it in our April update next year. The last one in Virginia is a new study called the Virginia Peninsula Region Study, which includes the city of Hampton, Newport News, Williamsburg, and the counties of James City and York and Virginia. So it's basically that peninsula bounded by the James River and the York River. This one is in the early stages of development. Like the others, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be looking at a range of options, including flood walls, levees, floodproofing, gates, and nature-based solutions. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the city of Hampton plan to host a public scoping meeting sometime during this month, and the dates and times of that will be posted on the website that you see listed below. Next slide, please. So I know we've talked in one of our previous presentations about the historic area remediation site. That's a dredge material placement site located offshore of New Jersey. It's nearing capacity, and the EPA is working on evaluating alternatives, which include allowing for additional placement of material, extending the boundaries of the site, or identifying other potential remediation options in the New York Bight, as well as designating a fishery enhancement beneficial use site. EPA has been surveying the HARS since October 2nd and will be continuing surveys through October 16th. As part of this survey, they're doing a pilot eDNA study in which water samples will be collected over different bottom habitat types to see if eDNA sampling and analysis is a tool that can be used to see what fish species use different bottom features. So pictured here is a map showing where they're planning to do those eDNA sampling locations. As a reminder, if you go to the next slide, the concept of the fisheries enhancement beneficial use site is in the very early stages of consideration. And I think my colleague Jesse brought it up the last update. EPA will be reaching out for input and suggestions on how and where dredged sand and deepened material can be used to enhance fisheries. For example, creating a shoal feature, as well as potential locations that should not be considered because of conflicts with fisheries. Potential fisheries enhancement areas are on that map as A, B, and C. Should the eDNA sampling be deemed effective, EPA hopes to use that data to provide information on what species we could expect to benefit from potential habitat features that would be created out of sand, clay, glacial till, and rock from the upcoming deepening projects. 3 things that EPA wanted us to emphasize about this is that the materials that will be used will be clean sands and new work material. They wouldn't be filling the entire polygon. They would be built as separate features within the polygon, and there would be monitoring and adaptive management of sites and features, and a lot of stakeholder engagement in the management. So this is not a set in stone thing. They'll be seeking out a lot of input from the fishing community, and we'll continue to do so in the coming months. Next slide. All right, we're going from the ocean to the rivers, and this I think is pretty much near the end of where we're going, and it's hydropower. So I'm not sure how interested the council is in hydropower, but we have a couple of new things happening in the Mid-Atlantic with respect to hydropower activities. Currently, we have 2 proposals on the Delaware River on existing dams to install hydropower facilities. One is on the Schuylkill River, which is the largest tributary to the Delaware, and it's a new facility proposed on the existing Norristown Dam, which is the 4th dam up from the confluence of the Delaware River. The applicant has requested an exemption from FERC licensing, which means that this is our only shot when FERC is approving this. It's our only shot to really work with the project to ensure that we get fish passage on it. The other dam on the Delaware River is on the Lehigh, which is the 2nd largest tributary to the Delaware. And it's also a new hydropower facility, and it's proposed on the existing Chain Dam, which is the 2nd dam up from the confluence of the Delaware River. This is for an original FERC license with a less than 10 megawatt project. So hydropower has been proposed at this project before, but the plans didn't come to fruition. So this is a more standard hydropower project. On the Susquehanna River, we have relicensing is getting underway for the second and third dams on the main stem, which are Holtwood and Safe Harbor respectively. Interestingly, the fish passage at these dams has not operated since 2020, when the northern snakehead, an invasive species, was first captured at the fishways at the Conowingo Dam, which is the lowermost dam on the river. The states are very concerned about the fishways as a mechanism to spread invasive fish species upstream in the watershed and have pushed hard for trap and transfer and haul operations up from the Conowingo above the dams. So there's no volitional passage at the first 3 dams right now. Lastly, through the Susquehanna River Anadromous Fish Cooperative, we've been working collaboratively, including with the power companies, to identify opportunities to enhance the long-term restoration potential for American shad and river herring on the Susquehanna while addressing these state concerns. Right now, there's really no clear answers, but we're working to achieve consensus moving forward, trying to balance the passage of fish over these dams while minimizing the spread of northern snakeheads, blue catfish, and flathead catfish. Next slide. And this is our last slide, and it's just some good news. We don't have any aquaculture project updates, so you'll shortly be able to get to see your baseball games. But we did want to announce that we have a new regional aquaculture coordinator. So Anushka joins Kevin Madley as our coordinator, and she has more than 26 years experience in the aquaculture sector, including marine ornamentals, microalgae, shrimp, finfish, shellfish, and macroalgae, including 14 years as an associate extension educator in marine aquaculture with the Connecticut Sea Grant. So we're happy to have Anushka join our division. And with that, that is our update for the last 6 months.
Thank you very much, Karen. Any questions? Greg?
Yeah. Slide number 5, can you go back to that for me real quickly? With that right there, so you're going to be continuing to dredge the sand from off the beach there and identify habitat prime fishing areas not to touch, or I just want to be clear on that, because in the past, just, there's been some spots there such as the Manasquan Ridge, the Annex, and Lucky Strike that you have taken the sand off that were all fish habitats in the past. And I wanted to know if you were going to be, seeking public comment about that ahead of time, or how you will approach this to the council. Thank you.
Sure. So the dredging and the placement on the beaches is the Army Corps of Engineers. We know fisheries will consult with them under the Magnuson-Stevens Act and the Endangered Species Act. So right now we are working with the Army Corps to try to make sure that they don't touch any of those areas. Our recommendations involve avoiding any areas that are important fishing grounds. So what they're doing now is, well, first we tell them, if you look on the New Jersey prime fishing habitat maps, stay off those areas. The second is any of the areas that they do identify as potential burrow areas, we want them to survey and tell us what's there. What are the bottom types like? Are they sand ridges? Is it important habitat? Are there shellfish there? All of that information for us to be able to provide them with more advice as to whether or not we think they should use that area as a burrow area. I think, as mentioned, I think in the presentation on wind, we provide conservation recommendations. So we can't make them not use those locations, but we can recommend that they not be used. And when they do make these selections, there'll be a public, National Environmental Policy Act process. So there'll be opportunities for the public to comment when they do make selections.
Michelle Laval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Karen, for the presentation. You mentioned the the cleanup of the Key Bridge, and I was just curious if you had any information on just the pollutant load from the bridge collapse and just the trapping of the vessel that was there from that effort.
I don't have any specific information on that. I'm sure that, you know, the Federal Highways Administration and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard probably have a better understanding about what happened with all of that. We're mostly involved from the perspective of the dredging and the removal, and it was an emergency operation, so it happened under more streamlined and emergency consultation procedures. So now as things are kind of settling out and they're working on demolition and they're going a little more slowly, we'll be coordinating more on things.
Joe Semino?
Yeah, just quickly, thanks. I just wanted to mention that Army Corps has reached out to New Jersey DEP, and as was mentioned, for some of the coordination with NOAA, the state has had consultation with NOAA staff, and so we're making sure our comments have been the same on the wind stuff. We have not yet done that with these borrow areas, but it's always great to work with and making sure that we're providing similar comments on the EFH stuff. So be happy to reach out to NOAA on that too. Thanks.
Any more questions or comments around the table? Anyone from the audience? Seeing none, thank you very much. I think her hand's been up since before. Oh, all right, Julia, go ahead. Julia.
Yeah. Thank you, Skip. I have a very old interest in this area. I work closely with some other environmental groups in New Jersey about dumping contaminated sediments from a Superfund site, Diamond Shamrock site. There was a plan to dump very bad metals, PCBs, all kinds of stuff in dredge spoil from the Diamond Shamrock site in the Hars. And that was a plan by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I was wondering, who would you contact at the Army Corps? And I do appreciate your presentation. I really do a lot because it shows you're on top of this stuff. But who would, at the Army Corps, would you contact for more information about what they're dumping and where they're dumping?
I would contact the US EPA. Excuse me, because they're the ones that essentially manage the HARs. They do it in cooperation with the Army Corps of Engineers, but it usually is the US EPA. And the point of contact there is Mark Reese, R-E-I-S-S.
R-E-I-S-S. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Seeing no more comments, thank you very much, Karen, and looking forward to hearing your next report about what you're going to do about see what the Army Corps of Engineers are going to do about the new jetty that they're going to have to put in here at Indian River Inlet and all the beach replenishment that's going to have to be done here before the whole road washes out. With that, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Before we adjourn, we have an announcement from Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will be having hospitality this evening. It's in room 384. Everyone's invited, but if you don't have a key, if you don't have a key card, you're going to need to find someone that does, because there's probably 3 doors that you'll have to use the key on before you get to 384. And I can't tell you how to get to that room because I don't know how to get to that room, but it's over in this corner of the building. So it's in the condo part of the hotel. So what's that? Oh, well, if you get lost, just come to the corner and yell, and then I'll come down and get you, because by that time I'll know where I'm at. So 384, we'll see everyone there. Thank you.
All right, with that, thank you, everybody. We will be start promptly again at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Ugh.